Two envelopes paradox. You're sitting at a table. Two envelopes are placed in front of you. They look exactly the same. Sealed, no markings. You're told one of them contains twice as much money as the other. That's it, no extra details. Nothing more. Just one has more than the other. You're asked to pick one. You do. You're holding it in your hands now, still sealed, and then someone tells you if you want, you can switch to the other envelope instead. No catch. Just a simple choice. Seems harmless, right? But then your brain starts whispering. Hang on. What if I pick the smaller one? Then the other envelope has double the amount. That would mean I lose out if I stick with this one. But what if I already picked the bigger one? Then the other envelope has half as much. So should I switch? Should I stay? Your mind starts spinning. Let's try putting some numbers to it. Imagine the envelope you picked has $10 in it. If it's the smaller one, then the other envelope must have 20. But if it's the bigger one, then the other has 5. So now your brain goes, all right, there's a 50% chance I'll gain 10 and a 50% chance I'll lose 5. That sounds like a better deal to switch, right? But if that logic makes you want to switch, guess what? The same logic applies no matter which envelope you're holding. Even if you switch, you'll want to switch back. Then again, and again. It turns into this endless loop, where switching always seems better, no matter what. And that's the trap. This is the two envelopes paradox. A perfect little brain glitch dressed up in a simple game. What makes it so sneaky is that it feels logical. It feels like you're doing math, like you're thinking rationally. But the foundation is built on uncertainty. You're calculating probabilities without actually knowing how the amounts were chosen. Were they randomly generated? Is there a limit? Is 10 the base amount, or could it be anything? Without those rules, every guess is just smoke. It's your brain trying to build a house out of fog. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Real mathematicians, like actual PhDs who publish papers and argue in journals, have obsessed over this thing. Some say it's a mistake in how we calculate expected value. Others say it's a flaw in reasoning under uncertainty. Some try to solve it with Bayesian logic. But even they don't totally agree. That's how deep the trap goes. You're not just being fooled. The logic itself is tangled. But what's wild is how close this is to real life. This is the same trap you fall into when you start second-guessing a choice you already made. You pick a college major, and then wonder if the other option would have been better. You move to a new city, and then catch yourself thinking about the city you didn't pick. You start a relationship, and then question if someone else out there was a better fit. It's the same brain process. You make a choice. Then you imagine the other envelope. The part that really messes with you is that switching always feels smarter, even if it's not, even if there's no reason to believe the other envelope is better. You feel that itch, that doubt, that maybe. And even when you tell yourself it's irrational, even when you know it's a trap, it still works. That's the power of a good paradox. It keeps pulling you in. Not with answers, but with just enough confusion to make you think there might be one. So here you are, still holding an envelope. And that quiet voice in your head keeps asking, what if the other one's better? That's the paradox. And it doesn't let you go. And here's the twist. That little flicker of doubt you feel right now, that's the doorway to something even stranger. This is just the first trap. The next ones don't just mess with numbers. They mess with how you see reality itself. get comfortable, or don't, because it's about to get a whole lot weirder. Unexpected hanging paradox. Imagine this. You're locked up in a prison cell. One day, the warden shows up and says you're going to be hanged next week. But here's the twist. The execution will be on a weekday, before noon, and it'll be a complete surprise. You won't know the day. It could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. But when it happens, you will not see it coming. So you start thinking, all right, let's play this out. You figure it can't be Friday, because if you're still alive on Thursday night and nothing's happened yet, then Friday is the only option left. That wouldn't be a surprise. So Friday is out. Then you go, well, if it can't be Friday, then it also can't be Thursday. Because if you make it through Wednesday and you already ruled out Friday, then Thursday becomes predictable too. So Thursday's out. You keep doing this. Wednesday's gone. Then Tuesday. Then Monday. You end up convincing yourself that there's no day left for the hanging to happen. So logically, the hanging is impossible. But then, say it's Wednesday. The guards come in, grab you, and take you out to be executed. And you're completely shocked. That moment right there is the trap. This is the unexpected hanging paradox. It's one of those ideas that feels like it breaks your brain. You use logic to eliminate every day, but the surprise still works. You thought you figured it out, but your reasoning created a loop that fed back into itself. You walked right into the trap. And the scary part is, this is not just some philosophical riddle. This kind of flawed logic happens in real life all the time. Think about any time you've tried to prepare for something unexpected, like waiting for test results, or waiting to get fired, or waiting for someone to break up with you. You start analyzing every single day. You convince yourself it'll happen Monday. Then it doesn't. So you say, okay, maybe Tuesday. But then it's Wednesday, and you're still overthinking it. By the time it actually happens, you're still shocked. You wasted all that mental energy trying to outthink a situation that was always going to surprise you anyway. And this paradox plays directly into how the human brain handles uncertainty. There's something called the illusion of control. Psychologists have studied this. We tend to believe we have more control or foresight over outcomes than we actually do, especially in situations that make us anxious or fearful. This paradox feeds that illusion. The prisoner tries to gain control by reasoning through the possibilities. But the logic ends up betraying him, because the whole setup is designed to twist back on itself. It's like trying to predict when someone will pull a prank on you. The more you try to anticipate it, the more likely you are to miss it entirely, because the element of surprise only works when your guard is down, and the paradox builds on that tension. Here's another way to look at it. Say you're waiting for a package. You're told it'll come one day next week, but the company says it'll be a surprise. You start thinking, if it hasn't come by Thursday, then it has to be Friday, but that wouldn't be a surprise, right? So you rule out Friday, then Thursday, then Wednesday. Same loop. You overthink the whole week. Then boom, the doorbell rings Wednesday morning, and you're shocked, even though you tried so hard not to be. The paradox doesn't break logic. It uses it against itself. The more you try to be smart about it, the deeper you fall into the trap, and that's what makes it so brilliant. It exposes how flawed our reasoning can be when we try to eliminate uncertainty. We don't like the idea of not knowing, so we make up stories, rules, calculations. But when the rules collapse, we're left confused. And in that confusion, the surprise hits even harder. The unexpected hanging paradox isn't just a logic puzzle. It's a mirror. It shows you how fragile certainty really is. How easily our minds can build structures that look logical on the surface but collapse under pressure. So the next time you think you've planned for every possibility, remember this paradox. Because sometimes the most dangerous trap is the one you talk yourself into. Liar Paradox. All right, get ready for something that might break your brain in the best way possible. You've probably heard someone say something like this before. I always lie. Now just stop for a second and think about that sentence. If that person is telling the truth, then they're lying. But if they're lying, then they're telling the truth. So, which is it? That's the liar paradox. It's simple, it's sneaky, and it completely destroys your ability to find a stable answer. Because no matter how you try to flip it, it loops back on itself. This is one of the oldest logic traps ever recorded. It goes all the way back to ancient Greece. A philosopher named Epimenides said something like this: all cretins are liars. And he was from Crete. So if he's telling the truth, then he's lying. But if he's lying, then maybe he's telling the truth. You get caught in this loop that just won't end. At first, it sounds like a joke or just a weird brain teaser. But this paradox actually messes with the very core of how truth works, because it takes something really simple, just a single sentence, and turns it into a war between meaning and logic. It's like trying to define a word using itself. It sounds okay at first, but it just spins in circles. There's no exit, no final answer. And that's exactly the point. Now here's where it gets crazy. This paradox didn't just confuse philosophers. It shook the foundations of mathematics and logic in the 20th century. There was this mathematician named Kurt Gödel. He built an entire proof called Gödel's Incompleteness Theorem, based on a similar idea. He basically created a mathematical version of the liar paradox, a statement that says, this statement cannot be proven. And what he showed was terrifying to the logic world. He proved that in any system of math or logic complex enough to be useful, there will always be statements that are true but can't be proven. That's not a guess. That's a fact backed by actual math. All because of a weird little loop like the liar paradox. You might be thinking, okay, that's interesting, but how does this affect real life? Well, think about arguments you've had with people. Ever had someone say something just vague enough that no matter how you respond, they twist your words against you? You try to call them out, but they flip it. They make you question what they actually meant. That's the liar paradox, just wearing a human face. Or think about misinformation online. One post says something is fake. Another post says the first one is lying. Then a third one debunks the second one. You start going down the rabbit hole. Which one is the truth? Which one is lying? At some point, the lines blur so hard that your brain just taps out. You give up trying to make sense of it. That mental fatigue, that burnout, is exactly what the liar paradox creates. Not just confusion, but a kind of exhaustion from chasing a stable answer that doesn't exist. And our brains hate that. We're wired to seek patterns, to resolve contradictions. When we hit something that can't be resolved, we either freeze up or fall into denial. That's why paradoxes like this are so powerful. They reveal where our mental systems break down. Some scientists and linguists have even tried to fix it. They create these weird categories like hierarchical languages, where statements can't refer to themselves. But in the real world, We refer to ourselves all the time. We lie about lying. We tell half-truths. We make sarcastic jokes. So those clean solutions don't really hold up in messy, everyday human speech. And the deeper you dig, the more you start to realize. Maybe the real trap is our obsession with needing everything to make perfect sense. Because the liar paradox doesn't have a clean resolution. It just exists. It's not a riddle waiting for a clever answer. It's a glitch in the way language works. A reminder that sometimes meaning can fold in on itself like a black hole. So the next time you hear someone say they're lying or that everything they say is false, don't just laugh and move on. Think about what that actually means. It's not just nonsense. It's a door into a place where logic gets fuzzy and certainty disappears. And once you walk through that door, you start to see how fragile truth can really be. Prisoner's dilemma. You get caught up in something serious. Not alone. Someone else is involved. You're both in deep, and now you're separated, sitting in two different rooms, waiting to hear what comes next. Then the offer drops. You can rat the other person out. If they stay quiet and you talk, you walk away free and they take the fall. 10 years, just like that. But if you both talk, you both get 5. And if you both stay silent, you each get 1 year. Minimal damage. Now here's where it gets messy. You're trying to figure out what the other person is thinking. You're asking yourself, are they going to keep their mouth shut, or are they about to screw me over? Because if they stay silent and you talk, you win. But if you stay silent and they talk, you lose big. And that fear, that possibility of being the only one who stays loyal, makes betrayal start to feel like the smart move. This is the prisoner's dilemma, and it messes with your sense of logic in the worst way. On the surface, snitching feels safer. It protects you. But if both of you think that way, you both lose. You both get more time than you would have if you just trusted each other. It's a trap, one that looks like it rewards selfishness, but actually punishes it hard. And this isn't just some made-up problem. It happens in real life constantly, in business, in friendships, in relationships. Two people, both trying to protect themselves, and in the process, they burn everything down. Take two companies. They're competing in the same industry. If both of them decide to work with integrity, keep fair prices, and play long-term, they both do fine. But if one slashes prices to grab more market share, the other one has to react. They both enter a race to the bottom. Profit drops. Customers lose trust. Both sides suffer, all because they couldn't stop trying to one-up each other. Or take a relationship. You get into a fight. Instead of opening up or apologizing, you decide to pull back. Protect your pride, because maybe you're thinking, if I give in first, I lose. But the other person is thinking the same thing. And now both of you are just sitting there, holding your ground, waiting for the other one to fold. No one talks. Days go by. That silence turns into distance. Distance turns into resentment, all because no one wanted to be the one who gave first. That's the heart of this paradox. You think you're protecting yourself, but what you're really doing is cutting off the one thing that could have saved you. Cooperation. And here's the wild part. Studies have been run on this. People are given the exact same choice structure over and over again, with fake prisoners, game theory simulations, all of it. What they found is this: if the players know they'll interact more than once, they're more likely to cooperate, because trust starts to build. They realize that long-term benefit beats short-term gain. But if it's a one-time thing, a single round. People almost always betray. They don't want to take the risk. They want the win right now, even if it means screwing the other person over. That's the scary part. When there's no future connection, trust dies fast. This dilemma exposes something brutal about human behavior. We say we value loyalty. We say we want to work together. But the moment things get uncertain, we flip. We cover ourselves. We assume the worst. And by doing that, we often create the exact outcome we were trying to avoid. It's fear disguised as logic. And that fear is everywhere. It's why people cheat on someone before they get cheated on. It's why business partners cut deals behind each other's backs. It's why we hold back in conversations, stay guarded, and don't show what we really feel. Because we think if we do, we'll be the one left vulnerable. But if no one ever takes that first step, nothing ever changes. Everyone's just stuck in a loop of distrust, waiting for the other person to prove them wrong. So the next time you're in a situation where trust feels like a gamble, think about this dilemma. Ask yourself, am I protecting myself, or am I just afraid of getting hurt first? Because most of the time, the cost of betrayal is a lot higher than the risk of being honest, and that choice, to break the loop or keep feeding it, might be the real test of who you are. Zeno's paradoxes. You think you understand motion. You walk across a room, you throw something, you run, you stop. Simple stuff, right? Until someone comes along and says, actually, none of that makes any sense. And not in a poetic way. In a very real, brain-twisting, mathematical way. That someone was a Greek philosopher named Zeno. And the guy didn't just create one paradox. He created a whole series of them, all targeting one idea, motion. Something so basic, so obvious, that no one ever questioned it, until Zeno showed up and tore it apart. Let's start with one of his most famous ones. Imagine a runner trying to reach the finish line. Before they can get there, they have to get halfway. Fine. But before they can get halfway, they have to get a quarter of the way. And before that, an eighth, and a 16th, and so on forever. Every time they try to move forward, there's always another halfway point to cross. Infinite steps, infinite divisions. So if motion means crossing an infinite number of points, how does anyone ever actually move? How do you reach anything if there's always one more tiny step to take? It sounds ridiculous, because in real life we obviously move all the time. You walk to the door. You drive to work. You blink. But what Zeno did was expose a flaw in how we think about distance, time, and space. He took the logic we rely on, the idea that you can break anything into smaller parts, and pushed it to a place where it stopped making sense. And it gets weirder. Another version is Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles, the fastest man alive, gives a slow tortoise a head start in a race. Seems fair. But Zeno says Achilles will never catch up. Why? Because by the time Achilles reaches the point where the tortoise started, the tortoise has moved a little ahead. And by the time Achilles reaches that new point, the tortoise has moved again, always just a bit farther, over and over again. The gap keeps getting smaller, but it never completely disappears. So technically, Achilles never overtakes the tortoise. That's the trap. Infinite steps, infinite time. It's like motion gets stuck inside its own math. But here's the twist. Modern science, calculus, and physics eventually found ways to explain how infinite divisions can still lead to a finite result. Mathematically, we now know that an infinite number of smaller and smaller steps can still add up to a final distance. So Achilles does catch up. You do reach the finish line. The paradox, in one sense, is solved. But that doesn't mean it's gone, because what Zeno really exposed wasn't just a glitch in our math. He hit something deeper. The tension between how we experience the world and how we try to explain it. Between the flow of real life and the rigid systems we build to describe it. Think about how we measure time. We chop it into hours, minutes, seconds, milliseconds. But if you keep slicing it up, when does a moment become meaningless? How small can a moment get before it's not time anymore? Or space? We measure things in inches, centimeters, atoms, quarks. But is there a smallest unit of space? A point where you can't divide anymore? Or does it go on forever? Zeno's paradoxes hit at the core of those questions. Not because they break physics, but because they reveal the cracks in how we try to make sense of the universe. And it goes even further. We use logic and reason to try to control the chaos around us. We create systems, equations, blueprints. We want things to make sense. But Zeno's thought experiments remind us that sometimes our logic traps us. It starts folding in on itself, and suddenly something obvious becomes impossible. It's a warning, in a way, that even the most basic truths, like the fact that you're moving, can be taken apart, flipped, and made to feel completely unreal. All it takes is the right question. So next time you walk across the room, think about how many halfway points you just crossed. Think about the steps your brain is skipping over just to make the world feel normal. Because the only reason motion feels real is that you stopped questioning it. Zeno never did. Newcomb's paradox: you walk into a room and see two boxes on a table. One is transparent. You can see there's $1,000 inside. The other box is sealed, completely opaque. You have no idea what's in it. Could be empty. Could be $1 million. Now here's the deal. You can either take both boxes, the 1,000 in the transparent one and whatever's in the sealed one, or you can take just the sealed box and walk away. But there's a catch, and this is where things start to melt your brain. Before you walked in, a super-intelligent being, let's just call it the predictor, already looked at you. It studied your behavior, your decision-making, your patterns. It's been right about everyone in the past, and based on that, it already predicted what you're going to do. If it predicted you'd take both boxes, it left the sealed box empty. But if it predicted you'd take only the sealed box, it put $1 million inside it. So now you're standing there, staring at these two boxes, trying to figure out what to do. Take both and guarantee yourself at least $1,000, or trust that sealed box and maybe walk away with $1 million, or maybe nothing. Your brain's probably doing loops right now. And that's exactly what Newcomb's paradox is designed to do. This isn't just a trick question. It's a full-on war between logic and intuition. Let's break it down. From one angle, the sealed box has already been filled or not. The predictor already made its choice, so it shouldn't matter what you do now. That part is done. In that case, you might as well take both boxes. Worst case, you walk away with 1,000. Best case, you get 1,000 plus $1 million. But then the paradox hits you from the other side. The predictor's whole system is based on being insanely accurate. It predicted what you were going to choose, and it has a track record of being right every time. So if you take both boxes, it probably saw that coming and left the $1 million out. But if you take only the sealed box, it probably predicted that too, and rewarded you with the $1 million. So what do? This paradox splits people. Hardcore logical thinkers say take both. It's called dominance reasoning. More is more. No matter what's in the sealed box, you're adding 1,000 to it by taking both. But others, especially those who trust the predictor's ability, say the opposite. Just take the sealed box. Trust the system. Because historically, people who took only the sealed box walked away with more money. This is where your brain starts to glitch. You're stuck between two completely reasonable strategies. One says maximize what's in front of you. The other says trust the prediction and act like the future already knows what you're going to do. Newcomb's paradox isn't really about money. It's about free will. It messes with your sense of choice. Because if the predictor already knows what you'll choose, are you really making a decision? Or are you just acting out something that's already been calculated? And if that's true, what does that say about your freedom? About your ability to control your own outcomes, even crazier. This kind of thinking shows up in real life. Think about credit scores, insurance rates, job interviews. Society constantly tries to predict your behavior before you act, and those predictions shape the opportunities you're given. You're being boxed into choices based on how likely you are to succeed or fail. The predictor isn't some alien machine. It's all around us. It's the algorithms watching what you click. It's the systems that decide if you're a risk or a reward. And you're constantly playing this paradox without even realizing it. Newcomb's paradox holds up a mirror to that. It forces you to ask, am I choosing my future, or am I just reacting to how someone already sees me? And maybe the scariest part is this: there might not be a right answer. It's not about finding the correct solution. It's about realizing that sometimes logic and trust don't line up. Sometimes you can't think your way out of the trap. You just have to decide what kind of person you want to be in the middle of it. Because one path gives you certainty, the other gives you possibility, and in the end, the choice might say more about you than it does about the boxes. Russell's Paradox. There's a village. Small, quiet, nothing strange about it. Except for one weird rule. There's a barber in this village, and the barber shaves every man in the village who does not shave himself. Now stop right there. Sounds simple, right? The barber just takes care of the guys who don't shave themselves. Nothing too deep. But then the question comes in. The one that flips everything inside out. Who shaves the barber? Because if the barber shaves himself, then he's someone who shaves himself. And the rule says he only shaves people who do not shave themselves. So he shouldn't be shaving himself. But if he doesn't shave himself, then he's one of the people who doesn't shave themselves. Which means, by the rule, he must be shaved by the barber. But he is the barber. And just like that, the whole system breaks. This is Russell's paradox. It looks innocent at first, like some clever word game or logic riddle. But what it actually does is expose a hole in the foundations of logic itself. This was discovered by the philosopher and mathematician Bertrand Russell in the early 1900s. And it wasn't just some fun idea. It caused serious chaos in the world of mathematics and philosophy. Here's why. At the time, math was being built on this powerful new foundation called set theory. The idea was that everything could be organized into sets, collections of things that follow specific rules. A set of numbers, a set of shapes, a set of objects that don't contain themselves. And that last one. That's where Russell dropped the bomb. He asked, what about the set of all sets that do not contain themselves? That one question shattered the whole framework, because just like the barber, it creates a contradiction. If the set contains itself, then by definition it should not contain itself. And if it does not contain itself, then by definition it should contain itself. It loops forever. It doesn't go anywhere. It breaks the system from the inside. And this wasn't just an abstract problem. At the time, people genuinely thought set theory was the way to organize all of mathematics. But Russell's paradox showed that even the most perfect system can fall apart if one tiny contradiction sneaks in. You might be thinking, why does this matter? It's just logic nerd stuff. But that's the scary part. Our entire way of thinking, from math to computer code to legal systems to the way we sort data, is based on clean, logical rules. And Russell showed that, if you're not careful, even something as basic as putting things into categories can spiral into chaos. And this doesn't just stay in math books. You see it show up in real life. Think about platforms trying to moderate content. Say they create a list of accounts that should not moderate themselves because they're under review. But then one of those accounts is the one managing the list. So now what? Should it review itself or not? Or in code, recursive systems, programs that try to check themselves for errors. If the system that checks for bugs is itself buggy, who checks the checker? Or think about identity. You define yourself based on things you are not. But then you start acting in ways that contradict those definitions. You say you don't belong to a certain category, but your behavior fits inside it. Now you're stuck. Are you the exception? Or were the rules wrong? Russell's paradox teaches something uncomfortable. Some questions don't have clean answers. Some problems can't be solved without breaking the very logic you're trying to use. It exposes the limits of definition, the limits of certainty. And here's the real trap. Our brains are wired to look for structure, to want things to be neatly labeled, categorized, boxed up. We hate loose ends, but paradoxes like this one are loose ends that tie themselves into knots the more you pull on them. So instead of solving them, we end up chasing our own logic in circles. Russell didn't just find a glitch in the matrix. He found that the matrix itself might be built on cracks. And even today, there are workarounds, patched up versions of set theory, rules about what types of sets are allowed. But the core paradox is still there, waiting. Like a reminder that our smartest ideas can still collapse under the weight of their own rules. So the next time you hear a rule that sounds airtight or a system that seems flawless, ask yourself, who shaves the barber? Because if no one does, we've got a problem. Sorites Paradox, take 1 grain of sand. That's not a pile. Everyone agrees. Now add another grain, still not a pile. Add a third, a fourth, a fifth, still not a pile. But at some point, you keep adding and suddenly people start calling it a pile. But when? When does it become a pile? At what number? That's the Sorites Paradox. It messes with something so basic that it feels like it shouldn't even be a problem. But it is. Because there is no exact moment where it flips. 1 grain doesn't make a difference. 2 grains don't. 10 grains probably don't. But eventually, it turns into something else entirely. And the line is invisible. Now take that same logic and apply it to everything else. When does a person go bald? Is it when they lose 1 hair? 10? 50? Is someone with 100 hairs still not bald? What about 99? You could keep going down 1 hair at a time, and no single step would ever feel like the one that changes the category. But eventually, they're bald. This is the power of the Sorites Paradox. It hides inside the gray areas of life. It exposes how shaky our categories really are. Because we love labels, we want sharp lines. This is a pile, this is not. This is bald, this is not. This person is rich, this person is not. But the real world isn't that clean. It shifts in tiny, quiet steps. And at no point does it warn you when you've crossed the line. Even worse, you can flip the paradox backward. Take a pile of sand and start removing grains, one by one. Is it still a pile? Of course. Remove another. Still a pile. Keep going. Still a pile. And then, suddenly, it isn't. But when did it stop? This messes with your sense of truth, because it makes you realize that categories we think are logical are actually built on vague thresholds. Social constructs, human agreement. You feel it in politics, too. When does someone go from poor to middle class? $1, 100, a new job. You can earn a little more slowly, gradually, and then one day, someone decides you no longer belong to the same group. But there was no single moment that caused it, just a slow drift. Or in relationships. When does someone become a friend? The first conversation. The fifth. The moment they remember your birthday. You never actually say it. But at some point they're just in that box now. Friend. But there was no hard switch. It happened quietly. Same with identity, beliefs, morality. People rarely wake up and change overnight. It's grain by grain, idea by idea, until you realize they're not the person they were. Or maybe you're not. The Sorites Paradox shows us how dangerous assumptions can be when we rely on clear boundaries that were never really clear to begin with. And it gets used in arguments all the time. Someone tries to draw a hard line where there isn't one. And someone else pushes back by saying, well, if you accept this case, then you have to accept the one that's almost like it. And the next one, and the next, until suddenly the rule collapses, and the entire thing becomes a slippery slope. But here's the thing. The Sorites Paradox doesn't just break logic. It reveals how deeply we rely on language to make the world feel manageable, and how badly language can fail us when we push it too far. Because we want reality to be binary, this or that, pile or not, person or not. But the real world lives in gradients, in fuzziness, in things that slowly transform without giving us permission to update our definitions. And if you're not careful, you'll miss those changes. Or worse, pretend they're not happening. You'll keep calling something a pile long after it's just a few grains, sitting alone. You'll label someone based on what they used to be instead of what they've slowly become. And that's the real trap of the Sorites Paradox. Not that it breaks logic, but that it exposes how much of your reality is built on guesses, vague lines, social shortcuts. It's not about sand, it's about change, and how we're never really sure when something becomes something else. So next time someone says, it's just one little change, just one small step, ask yourself how many of those you've already accepted without noticing. Because the pile didn't build itself in one move. It was grain by grain. Barber Paradox. There's a village. And in this village there's one barber. Just one. Now here's how things work. This barber has one simple rule. He shaves everyone in the village who does not shave themselves. He never shaves anyone who shaves themselves. Sounds clean, logical, no problem. Until you ask one question. Who shaves the barber? Now get ready, because your brain's about to trip over itself. If the barber shaves himself, then according to the rule, he should not be shaving himself, because he only shaves those who don't shave themselves. But if the barber doesn't shave himself, then he falls into the group of people who don't shave themselves, which means he should be shaving himself. And just like that, we're stuck. No matter what the barber does, he breaks his own rule. And this isn't just a weird riddle. It's a full-blown paradox. A contradiction that exists inside the very system that created it. This is called the Barber Paradox, and it was actually invented by Bertrand Russell. Yeah, the same guy from Russell's Paradox, to explain why certain systems of logic crash when they get too confident. Because what this paradox does is show how self-reference, when something tries to define or control itself, can lead to total collapse. It's the logical equivalent of biting your own teeth. Now zoom out a little. This isn't really about shaving. The barber is just a stand-in for something deeper. It's about rules that apply to themselves. Systems that try to regulate themselves. Loops that look fine on the surface, but break when they're turned inward. You've probably run into versions of this without realizing it. Ever seen a website with a button that says this page is under construction, but the only thing on the page is the under construction message? So is the page finished or not? Or think about government watchdogs, agencies that are supposed to monitor corruption. But who watches them? If they monitor themselves, they risk bias. If they don't, who holds them accountable? Or take it into the world of ethics. Imagine someone says they always question authority. But what if they become the authority? Do they question themselves? Can they? This paradox exists because we crave clean rules. But the second those rules try to apply to the very thing creating them, everything short-circuits. Even in programming, you get this. In code, there's something called recursion, a function that calls itself. Super useful. But if you don't set boundaries, it spirals into infinite loops and crashes. You need a stopping condition, something that tells it when to quit. Otherwise, it breaks. The Barber Paradox is like recursion without a stop. And that's the deeper warning hiding in it. Systems that try to be total, to account for everything including themselves, are doomed to fail unless they carve out exceptions. But the moment you create exceptions, the system isn't perfect anymore. It's got cracks. And once you know there's one crack, you start wondering how many others are hiding under the surface. This paradox is a red flag for blind logic. It shows that not every idea works when you push it to the extreme. Some structures, no matter how clever they seem, collapse under their own weight. And that applies to life too. You ever meet someone who lives by one rule? Always be honest, always be fair, never bend. And eventually, you see them hit a moment where that rule doesn't fit. And now they're stuck, because their identity depends on following that rule. But the situation needs something different. That's the barber. It's not a story about shaving. It's a story about rigidity. About what happens when your own logic traps you in a corner. Because if you don't allow flexibility, if your rules don't know when to make space for themselves, then eventually the system eats itself, and you're left with a barber who can't shave, a government that can't be questioned, a code that crashes from inside, or a person whose principles make them impossible to live with. So the next time someone brags about how flawless their system is, ask them the same question. Who shaves the barber? Because if they don't have an answer, they might not be as in control as they think. Bootstrap Paradox. You find an old book in your attic. The title is familiar. You open it and every page is filled with a story you always dreamed of writing. You never wrote it, but now that it's in your hands, you copy it word for word and publish it. It becomes a hit. Years pass. Then someone else finds that same book, And they do the same thing. They copy it, publish it, it spreads again. But here's the catch. None of you ever actually wrote it. You only found it. You passed it along. So who created it? That's the Bootstrap Paradox. It's what happens when something is pulled into existence without a clear beginning. A loop that feeds itself. A cause with no cause. An effect that creates its own origin. Let's crank it up. Say a physicist in the year 2100 invents the first working time machine. But before they can announce it to the world, someone knocks on their door. A stranger, and in their hands are the blueprints. Every detail of the time machine. The physicist studies them, builds the machine, and eventually goes back in time to deliver those same blueprints to their younger self. That's the loop. The physicist never invented the machine. They just followed instructions that came from themselves in the future. So where did the idea come from? This isn't just science fiction. This is a real paradox that messes with how we think about time and logic. It says you can have information, objects, or even people that exist purely because they were looped through time. No origin, no source, and that wrecks our sense of how the world works. We are wired to believe that everything starts somewhere. Ideas are created, inventions are built, stories are written, but the Bootstrap Paradox ignores all that. It says something can just exist because the timeline supports it. Because the loop is closed, it shows up in shows like Doctor Who, where Beethoven gets his own music handed to him before he writes it, or in the Terminator movies, where the robot technology from the future is used to invent the robots in the past. But this isn't just for time travel nerds. You see versions of this in real life too. Ever hear a quote online and have no idea who actually said it first? It just floats around, gets shared, reposted, credited to 5 different people. After a while, the quote exists with no origin. It's a self-sustaining loop. Nobody knows where it came from. It just is. Or think about conspiracy theories. One person says it as a joke. Another repeats it seriously. A third person finds it in an old forum and assumes it's fact. Then someone else finds that and claims it's evidence. At some point the loop becomes airtight. But the original moment was nothing. A whisper, a throwaway thought. This paradox hits you hardest when you realize how much of your world is built on secondhand knowledge. Beliefs passed down, traditions repeated. You might be living in a loop and never question where it started, and it works in reverse too. What if something you created gets passed back to you in the future? What if you hear a song and love it, and years later someone tells you that you wrote it, but you forgot? What if the only reason it exists is because we copied it off and passed it forward? The Bootstrap Paradox doesn't just mess with time. It messes with identity. Memory. Truth. It says not everything comes from somewhere. Some things just exist because they've always existed inside a closed loop of logic, and that's what makes it dangerous. If a system allows something to exist without origin, then anything can be true as long as it fits the loop. If it not be them, even as we've been around, you'll repeat them, believe where they came from. And so the person feels, did someone pretending to be real? Ask the question for this now, who pretended to be real at me. If you just with my business with brain, the voice that's how that's been to sit without paradox. We've been real maximize with it. Really, as long as I'm doing what's otherwise, the trolley problem. You see a trolley speeding down the tracks. It's not slowing down. The brakes are gone. Up ahead, 5 people are stuck on the main track. They can't move. But next to you, there's a lever. If you pull it, the trolley switches to a side track. Only thing is, there's one person on that track too. Pull the lever and one dies. do nothing and 5 die. That's the trolley problem. But don't let the simplicity fool you. This one isn't about trains. It's about you. And the twisted ways your brain tries to be logical and ethical at the same time. On the surface, most people say they'd pull the lever. Sacrifice 1 to save 5. Sounds like basic math. 5 is greater than 1. But the second you change even one little detail, the whole thing starts to crumble. What if the one person is someone you love? What if the 5 are strangers who committed crimes? What if you have to push someone onto the track with your own hands instead of just flipping a lever? Now you feel it. Because suddenly it's not about numbers anymore. It's about emotions, responsibility, guilt. And that's the trap. The trolley problem isn't testing what you think. It's testing what you're willing to live with. Let's look at real life. Autonomous cars are already dealing with versions of this. A self-driving car detects a crash is unavoidable. Should it protect the passenger inside or swerve and hit a pedestrian to minimize risk? These aren't theories anymore. Companies are writing algorithms that decide who lives. And the question becomes, who gets to program that morality or take hospitals? Say a doctor has one available donor and 5 patients waiting for different organs. Save 5 by sacrificing 1. Same logic, but doctors don't do that. Why not? Because even if the math adds up, something inside us resists the idea of playing God, of deciding who's worth more, of turning people into numbers. This paradox shows up everywhere. Imagine you run a business. You have to lay off 1 employee to keep 5 others paid. Do you do it? Imagine you see a lie spreading online that's helping people feel hopeful. Do you stop it with the truth if it risks ruining that comfort, or take war? Leaders send soldiers into battles knowing people will die. Sometimes they do it believing it'll save more lives in the future. That's trolley logic. But if the future never arrives, was it still worth it? The trolley problem never ends. That's what makes it brutal. No matter how many times you answer it, it just shifts shape. It doesn't want you to be consistent. It wants you to see how fragile your logic really is. And maybe the darkest part of all this, sometimes doing nothing feels better, feels cleaner, like your hands are off the lever. But that's the illusion, because not choosing is still choosing, letting 5 people die. Because you didn't want to choose still makes you part of the outcome, still makes you responsible. You don't get to step away from that. That's the real trap of this problem. It forces you to admit that every choice has blood on it, even silence, even hesitation, and once you accept that, you start to see it everywhere. In your daily life, you're already pulling levers. How you spend your time, who you prioritize, what you speak up for, what you ignore. You choose which voices you amplify and which ones you let get drowned out. You choose which pain is inconvenient and which pain you can't live with, and sometimes you'll feel like you made the right decision. But other times, that one choice will haunt you not because it was wrong, but because no choice was right. So the trolley problem isn't here to give you answers. It's not some riddle with a clever solution. It's a mirror. And when you look into it, all you see is how complicated your own ethics really are. And the moment you think you've solved it, it changes the rules, adds a twist, raises the stakes. Because it's not about solving a problem. It's about learning to live in a world where perfect choices don't exist, and sometimes the only thing you can control is whether or not you're honest about why you pulled the lever. Buridan's ass, a donkey stands between 2 identical piles of hay, same size, same distance, same smell. There's no difference, none at all. The donkey is starving, but it can't decide which pile to go to, so it stands there, frozen, waiting for a reason to choose. But no reason comes, and eventually it dies. That's Buridan's ass, a paradox about indecision taken to its deadliest form. It's easy to laugh at it. A dumb donkey stuck in a dumb loop. But replace the donkey with you. Replace the hay with 2 job offers, 2 relationships, 2 life paths, and suddenly it's not so funny. Because now it's personal, this paradox hits right at the heart of decision-making. It's not about right or wrong. It's about what happens when 2 options feel equally right or equally safe or equally meaningless. And you stall. You hesitate. You freeze. And if you sit there long enough waiting for a clear sign, the opportunity dies. Not because either option was bad, but because you didn't choose. Think about how many times you've felt that, caught between 2 decent ideas, 2 habits, 2 goals. You make lists, you flip coins, you ask friends. But no matter what you do, the fear of picking the wrong one keeps you stuck, and the cost of that indecision builds in silence. You lose momentum, you miss windows. The options get stale. You start to feel like both choices are slipping away while you wait for certainty that's never coming. Buridan's ass isn't about animals. It's about you expecting the world to give you clarity when clarity doesn't exist. It's brutal because it reveals something uncomfortable. You don't always need more information. You need to choose, even when it feels like guessing, even when it feels wrong, because waiting for a perfect signal is just another way to avoid risk. And here's where it gets darker. Modern life makes this paradox worse. We are overwhelmed with choices. You can scroll through hundreds of movies but not watch one. Swipe on dozens of people but never go on a date. Browse jobs for hours but never apply. Every option feels equal, every outcome uncertain, and that creates paralysis disguised as freedom. You think you're being careful. What you're really doing is standing still while time passes and opportunities fade. And this is where most people get stuck. They believe not choosing protects them. But not choosing is still a choice. And it has consequences. You stay in a relationship that's okay but not great. You hold on to a career that's stable but not exciting. You keep a habit that's comfortable but not useful. Because both directions feel risky, so you wait and wait. And one day you realize nothing changed. You didn't choose the wrong path. You just never took one. And you paid the price anyway. Buridan's ass teaches something most people don't want to hear. That sometimes you have to choose without knowing. Sometimes you have to move before you're ready. Because life isn't about perfect logic. When 2 choices feel equally valid, the only wrong move is no move. You're not always going to get a sign. You're not always going to be sure. And if you wait for the perfect answer, you might starve next to perfectly good chances. The paradox forces you to ask this. The paradox forces you to ask this. I was afraid to commit. How many times did I freeze and call a pain? How many moments did I felt it? That's very, I think for else, I can't feel the same way. I remember this, that both of the same good. I remember that is right. So when you move, you create a strange sort of fix for life. If I feel this part of the rough, let's do feel when you move your life, move earth, you sleep, I think before I look for the port life move forward. Gödel's Incompleteness Theorem. You're about to hear something that feels completely made up. In math, the most precise language we know, the one built to be logical and solid and absolute, there are some truths that are impossible to prove, even if they are 100% true. And the worst part is, we can't even tell which ones those are until we run into them face first. That is Gödel's Incompleteness Theorem. It is not a riddle or a play on words. It's a cold, brutal fact about the limits of logic itself. And it doesn't just apply to math. It applies to everything built on rules. Back in the early 1900s, people were trying to build a perfect foundation for all of mathematics. A set of rules that could explain everything. No gaps, no contradictions, no unanswered questions. Basically, a machine that could spit out every truth using pure logic. Then a young Austrian named Kurt Gödel walks in and drops a bomb. He proves, using math itself, that this dream is impossible, that no system of logic, no matter how well designed, can be both complete and consistent. In simple terms, that means you either have a system that misses some truths, or you have one that contradicts itself. You can't have both. And here's where it gets even weirder. He did this by creating a sentence inside the system that basically says this sentence cannot be proven true within this system. If the system proves the sentence, it's lying. If it doesn't prove it, then the sentence is true, but the system can't prove it. Either way, the system fails. This is not a bug. This is built into the core of logic. And the ripple effect is insane, because it means there are always going to be truths that live just outside the edge of what logic can catch. Always. No matter how far we advance, no matter how smart we get, there will always be something we can't prove. But that is still true. Now let that sit for a second. We like to believe that logic is the one thing we can count on. That if something is real, we can eventually prove it. But this theorem says nope. You can follow the rules perfectly, build a flawless system, and still miss something that matters. Still miss the full picture. It shakes the foundation of everything that relies on logic. Not just math, but computer science, artificial intelligence, even philosophy. Because if your system of thought depends on internal rules, Gödel is saying you will hit a wall. Not maybe, definitely. And you won't see it coming. This affects everything from how we think to how we design technology. It means there are limits not just to what we know, but to what we can ever know using logic alone. And some truths will live forever outside the box. You can build a perfect calculator. It still won't be able to compute every truth. You can create a flawless AI. It still won't be able to fully understand itself. And maybe most disturbing of all, you can follow every rule you've been given in life and still miss something vital. Something true. Because not everything true can be proven. So what does this mean for us? It means that certainty is an illusion, that logic alone won't always lead to truth, that some truths require a leap, a guess, an insight, a shift in perspective. It means that doubt isn't a weakness. It's a built-in part of reality. And if you're always waiting for proof before you believe something, you're going to miss things that are real but unreachable by logic. It also explains why some of the biggest breakthroughs in science and art and philosophy come not from strict logic but from intuition, from something outside the system looking in. Because from inside the system, you can't see the edge. You think the rules explain everything, but the rules are blind to their own limits. Gödel didn't just break math. He shattered our illusion of mental control. He proved that no matter how smart we get, there will always be truths that we can feel but not explain, recognize but not prove. And maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe that's just the shape of reality, not a closed system, but an infinite game. And now you're in it, trying to navigate a world that plays by rules you can't always see, a world where truth doesn't always come with proof. And sometimes the smartest thing you can do is admit that logic will only get you so far. And the rest, you just have to sit with. Hempel's Paradox. Imagine you walk outside and see a green apple. Nothing unusual about that. Then you go to the grocery store and see green grapes. Again, nothing strange. But according to a famous paradox in logic, both of those things actually give you evidence that all ravens are black. Seriously. That is Hempel's Paradox, also known as the paradox of the ravens, and it is one of the weirdest traps in reasoning, because it reveals just how badly our brains misunderstand evidence. Here's how it goes. Let's say you want to test the claim that all ravens are black. Every time you see a black raven, that supports the claim. Makes sense, right? Now let's flip that. Logically, if all ravens are black, then anything that is not black cannot be a raven. That's the contrapositive. And in logic, a statement and its contrapositive are exactly the same. They hold equal value. So now, if you see a green apple, you've technically just seen something that is not black and not a raven, which fits the rule, which means it supports the idea that all ravens are black. Wait, what? That's where the paradox kicks in. It's not wrong. It's just ridiculous. Because the idea that a piece of fruit tells you anything about the color of ravens feels insane. But logically, it checks out. The real twist here is how it exposes a deep flaw in how we think about knowledge. We tend to believe that more examples mean stronger evidence. But not all examples carry the same weight. Seeing 1,000 black ravens might feel strong. Seeing 1,000 green apples feels like nothing. But according to strict logic, both are technically supporting evidence. This paradox forces you to ask a painful question. What even counts as evidence? And how much does that evidence really matter? Because if everything that does not disprove a theory can be used to support it, then where do we draw the line? That kind of thinking leads to confirmation bias. It's how people end up believing anything that agrees with them and ignoring anything that doesn't. They start collecting irrelevant facts and calling it proof. But Hempel's paradox is not just a clever trick. It's a reminder that logic can be true and still not be useful, that the structure of an argument can be flawless while the conclusion feels totally disconnected from reality. In daily life, we filter this stuff without even realizing it. You don't walk around seeing blue cars and thinking it proves all cats are furry. But that is because your brain has already decided what counts as relevant. Your logic has been shaped by context, experience, assumptions. And that's exactly where bias slips in. This paradox shows how easy it is to believe you are thinking clearly when really you are just playing by invisible rules that you never questioned. It reveals that logic isn't neutral. It always carries a frame. And when the frame is too wide, everything becomes evidence. Which means nothing really is. And that brings us to the part most people miss. Evidence doesn't speak for itself. It only makes sense inside a system of meaning. And that system can be broken, twisted, or misleading even when every single step inside it is technically correct. That is why the green apple matters. Not because it tells you anything about ravens, but because it reminds you that logic has blind spots. And the more confident you are in your reasoning, the more dangerous those blind spots become. You can have a perfect argument and still be wrong. You can build a whole belief system on facts and examples and data and still miss the point completely, because logic is only as good as the frame you built it in. So next time you catch yourself stacking evidence to prove something, ask yourself this: am I collecting real proof, or just finding things that don't contradict me? Am I asking questions that can actually challenge my belief, or just padding it with irrelevant support. Hempel's paradox isn't really about ravens or apples. It's about humility, about realizing that even airtight logic can lead you somewhere totally absurd if you're not careful. It's about understanding that truth isn't just what adds up, it's what actually connects, and that matters way more. Because when everything starts to look like evidence, you stop knowing what anything really means. And in that fog, you can convince yourself of anything, even that a green apple proves all ravens are black. Omnipotence Paradox. There's a question that sounds simple at first. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that even they can't lift it? You hear it and your brain goes, yeah, all right, clever. But the more you sit with it, the more it starts to collapse the idea of absolute power itself. This is the Omnipotence Paradox, and it's one of the oldest logical traps in philosophy. On the surface, it seems like a joke, but what it really does is rip open the problem with the very idea of limitless power. Because no matter how you try to answer it, something breaks. Say you answer yes. The all-powerful being can create a stone so heavy that even they cannot lift it. Cool. But now they can't lift it. So they are not all-powerful anymore. All right. Then you try no. They can't create the stone. Which means again they are not all-powerful. Either way, the idea of unlimited power cancels itself out. It's like trying to imagine a square circle. You can say the words, but the concept doesn't make sense when you look closely. The Omnipotence Paradox exposes that same kind of contradiction, and what it's really doing is challenging how we define power itself. Is power just the ability to do anything, even the logically impossible? Or is real power something else entirely? Some people try to escape this paradox by saying power only includes what is logically possible. So lifting a stone and creating one are fine, but doing both in a way that contradicts itself is not real power, it's nonsense. That's like asking, can someone make a four-sided triangle? It's not that you can't do it, it's that the question itself is broken. But here's the twist. If power only applies to what is logically possible, then even an all-powerful being is bound by logic, which means logic is more powerful than they are. And once again, you are stuck. You see the trap now. The second you try to nail down what unlimited power means, you start to see its limits. Because the very idea of limitlessness runs into a wall the moment you ask it to define itself. This paradox messes with more than just abstract thought. It actually drills straight into how we think about control, perfection, and belief. A lot of people, religious or not, grow up with the idea that perfection means total control, that a perfect being can do anything, fix anything, undo anything. But the Omnipotence Paradox forces you to ask a harder question. Is perfection the ability to do anything, or the wisdom to know what shouldn't be done in the first place? Think about that. Maybe being all-powerful doesn't mean having every possible ability. Maybe it means never needing them. The deeper you go, the more you start to see that unlimited power might not be power at all. It might be chaos. If a being could break logic itself, how could we even understand or trust anything about them? Reality would fall apart instantly. You would not even know what true means anymore, because everything would be possible, including contradiction, including nonsense, including nothing making sense ever again. So maybe power, real power, comes not from being able to do the impossible, but from choosing not to, from working within structure, from understanding that rules create meaning, and that even a creator might not be above the system they made, not because they can't be, but because the system only works if they are within it. It is a subtle shift, but a huge one, because now power is not just brute force, it's not just infinite ability. It becomes a relationship with truth, with logic, with limits. And if that's the case, then the Omnipotence Paradox is not a problem. It's a mirror, showing us that the fantasy of pure control is hollow, and the idea of power with no boundaries doesn't make sense in the first place. So next time you hear someone talk about perfection or limitless strength or total control, remember this little question about the stone. Because if even a perfect being cannot escape logic without becoming illogical, then maybe logic is not the enemy of power. Maybe it is the thing that gives it shape. And maybe the most powerful thing is not being able to do everything, but being able to do exactly what is needed. Nothing more, nothing less. Sleeping Beauty Problem. There's a thought experiment that sounds like a weird fairy tale at first, but then it quietly messes with how you understand time, memory, and probability. And by the time it's done, you're not even sure what it means to be certain about anything anymore. It's called the Sleeping Beauty Problem. And it starts with a setup that feels almost too simple. So here's the situation. You're part of an experiment. On Sunday, a fair coin is flipped. If it lands heads, you're put to sleep, then woken up on Monday. And then the experiment ends. If it lands tails, you're put to sleep, woken up on Monday, and then put to sleep again and woken up on Tuesday. But each time you wake up, your memory of previous awakenings is erased, so you never know what day it is when you open your eyes. Could be Monday, could be Tuesday. You also don't know if the coin was heads or tails. Now here's the question. When you wake up, what is the probability that the coin landed heads? You might think easy. The coin was fair, 50-50. So the odds should be 1/2. But that answer starts to feel wrong real quick, because if it landed tails, you're going to be woken up twice. If it landed heads, you're only going to be woken up once. So across all the times you could be woken up, 2 out of 3 of them happen when the coin was tails. So should the answer be 1/3 heads and 2/3 tails? This is where the paradox hits. 2 answers that both feel logical depending on how you look at it. 1/2 if you're thinking from the perspective of the coin. 1/3 if you're thinking from the perspective of your own experience waking up. And suddenly, you're in a mental war between the math of the setup and the math of the observer. Both feel right, both feel wrong. And now you're questioning how you even calculate probability in a world where memory is unreliable and time is chopped up. What the Sleeping Beauty Problem really exposes is how fragile our understanding of probability is when it stops being about repeated events and starts being about personal experience. In other words, this paradox isn't about the coin. It's about you, your uncertainty, your perspective. What counts as information when you cannot trust your own timeline? This problem has split philosophers and mathematicians for years. One side, called the halfers, argue that since the coin is fair and was flipped only once, the probability has to be 1/2. Anything else feels like you're magically changing the odds based on when you wake up. But the other side, the thirders, argue that you can't ignore how often each outcome results in a waking moment. You're more likely to be in a tails scenario simply because there are more chances to wake up in it. And here's where it gets brutal. There's no clear way to resolve it, because both sides use valid reasoning, just from different angles. It's a clash between objective truth and subjective experience. between what happened once and what could be happening now, and this is what makes the Sleeping Beauty problem so powerful. It shows that our ideas of probability are not just math. They're tied up in identity, time, and knowledge. What you know, what you don't know, and how many versions of you could be experiencing something. This problem even ties into debates in quantum mechanics, where different branches of reality could be playing out depending on the outcome of an event. In some ways, it's a thought experiment that hints at much deeper questions about what it means to observe something, and whether knowing something is the same as being it. And maybe the scariest part is this: it forces you to admit that sometimes there is no single right answer, just different frames, different valid ways of looking at the same moment, and both can be logical. But they still don't agree. The Sleeping Beauty problem isn't just a quirky scenario. It's a crack in the surface of certainty. It shows you how hard it is to think clearly when you can't trust your place in time. It pulls the rug out from under your basic instincts about how likelihood works. And it makes you question whether you ever really know where you are in the story. So next time you feel totally sure about something, ask yourself, am I seeing the whole picture? Or just one version of it? Because waking up doesn't always mean you're fully aware. Sometimes, you're just a coin flip away from a completely different truth. Hilbert's hotel, let's say there's a hotel. But not just any hotel. This one has an infinite number of rooms. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3, and it just keeps going forever. It's completely full. Every single room is already taken. But then, someone new shows up and asks for a room. And here's the twist. The manager says, sure, no problem. Wait, what? How? This is Hilbert's hotel, also called the Infinite Hotel Paradox, and it completely destroys your normal sense of logic, space, and how numbers are supposed to work. Because in a normal hotel, full means full. No space left, but when infinity enters the picture, the rules fall apart. So how does the manager make space if every single room is already occupied? Simple. He just tells every guest to move to the next room. The person in room 1 goes to room 2. The person in room 2 goes to room 3. Room 3 goes to 4. And so on forever. Now room 1 is empty. One tiny move across an infinite line, and suddenly there's space for a new person. The hotel was full. Now it has room again. And you did nothing except shift the entire set of infinite guests over by one. It sounds ridiculous, but mathematically it works. That's the trap. That's what makes this paradox so dangerous. It shows that infinity doesn't behave like normal numbers at all. Let's say a bus shows up, not with one new guest, but with an infinite number of new guests. Infinity plus infinity. Still no problem, says the manager. This time, everyone in the hotel moves to the room that is double their current number. The person in room 1 goes to room 2. Room 2 goes to room 4. Room 3 to room 6. Now every odd, numbered room is empty, an infinite number of them. And that is where all the new guests go. They fill in rooms 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. Boom. You just made space for another infinity inside an infinity, and somehow it all fits. This is where your brain starts to break. Because every rule you grew up with about numbers and limits and space just stops working. You begin to realize that infinity is not a number. It's a concept, and a really unstable one. And here's the part that twists the knife. Even if you subtract an infinite number of guests from this hotel, it can still be full. You can remove every guest from every even-numbered room. That's half the hotel. And guess what? there's still an infinite number of guests left, because infinity minus infinity can still be infinity, or it can be zero, or it can be anything. It depends on how you remove things. That is the real mind bender. This paradox is not just some cute logic riddle. It punches right into the heart of what we think numbers mean. It forces you to accept that once you deal with the infinite, the math stops lining up with reality. The usual sense of more and less just evaporates. You can add to infinity and get the same infinity. Subtract from it, divide it, multiply it, and the rules don't always behave the way you expect. This is why people who work with infinity in mathematics have to be absurdly careful. Because one wrong assumption and you fall into nonsense. But the implications go way beyond math. Hilbert's hotel is a mirror for how we think about limits in life. We assume space runs out, time runs out, that things fill up, overflow, that resources are fixed. But infinity throws all that out. It suggests that maybe our limits are just illusions based on small scales. Or maybe infinity is just an abstract thing we can talk about, but never actually touch, something that makes sense in formulas but collapses in real life. That's the tension. That's what this paradox reveals. We can imagine infinite space, infinite time, infinite options, but the second we try to manage it, to control it, to make it behave like something familiar, it turns into madness. You think you understand size. Then you meet infinity and realize you were never even close. So next time you feel boxed in, like there's no room left, like everything's full, like all the doors are closed, remember the infinite hotel, where full doesn't mean full, where more always fits, and where the limits you see might only exist because you never questioned the rules. Hilbert's hotel isn't just a strange place. It's a warning, a reminder that logic can stretch further than comfort, that some ideas are too big to hold, but still worth thinking about. Because in a world where even infinity has room for more, what else might be possible? Preface Paradox. So imagine you've written a book. You've done your research, checked your sources, edited every chapter 10 times. Every statement in that book you believe to be true. You're confident. You've done your homework. But then, in the preface, you do something weird. You add a small note saying something like this: "Despite my efforts, it is possible that there are errors in this book." And just like that, you've created a paradox. Because now you're saying two things at once. You believe every sentence in the book is true, but you also believe that at least one of them might be false. How can both of those beliefs be true at the same time? This is the Preface Paradox, and it sneaks up on you with how ordinary it feels. It's not some cosmic mind bender. It's a situation you've probably lived through yourself. Writing something, saying something, believing it, but still leaving room for doubt. And this is the trap. If you really think one of your claims might be wrong, then how can you honestly say you believe them all? But if you do believe them all, then why admit that any of them might be false? The contradiction is subtle but brutal. It sits in the difference between believing individual things and believing a group of things. On their own, each chapter feels solid. But as a whole, you feel like something could slip through. And here's where it gets deeper. The Preface Paradox isn't just about writing books. It's about how we deal with knowledge in general. You trust your facts, but you also trust that you're not perfect. So now you're caught between confidence and humility, between precision and probability. This paradox hits hardest when you realize it mirrors how we think all the time. You might believe everything you're saying to someone is true. But if they asked, "Are you absolutely certain none of it is wrong?" you'd probably hesitate. Because we've all been wrong before. We all know how fallible memory, logic, and even evidence can be. It's not irrational to believe every claim you've made is true. But it's also not irrational to believe that, somewhere in that pile of beliefs, one could be flawed. That's not contradiction. That's realism. That's understanding that humans don't live in absolutes. But then what does belief even mean if you can believe something and still think it might be false? That's the pressure point this paradox hits. It forces you to ask whether belief is about truth or about confidence. Are you saying something is true because you know it is? Or because you're willing to bet on it, even knowing you might be wrong? Some philosophers try to solve this by separating the levels of belief. Like saying I believe all of these individually, but I also believe that, statistically, one might not hold up. It's like trusting each player on a team, but still thinking the team might lose. But others say that's not good enough, because if you believe that something is probably wrong, then you have to admit you doubt your own beliefs, even if it's just a tiny bit. And that means you're not really all in. This paradox sneaks into science too. Scientists often present theories they believe are accurate based on the data, but they also admit those theories could be revised or replaced. That's how progress works. You trust the model, but you never treat it as untouchable truth. So the Preface Paradox doesn't just show up in philosophy classrooms. It lives in research papers, in courtrooms, in everyday conversations. It's the moment where someone says I could be wrong, but here's what I think. That single sentence might be the most human expression of knowledge there is, and maybe that's the real lesson here. It's not about fixing the paradox. It's about understanding that belief is messy, that confidence and doubt can live in the same sentence, and that acknowledging uncertainty isn't weakness. It's honesty, because the people who scare you the most are the ones who never add a preface, the ones who never say maybe, the ones who think they're always right. So next time you explain something, teach something, or even write something down, remember the Preface Paradox. Not as a flaw, but as a feature, a quiet reminder that being sure and being humble can live side by side. And that real intelligence doesn't just come from believing things. It comes from knowing that even your best beliefs might not be the full story, and somehow that makes them stronger. Paradox of choice. You walk into a store to buy a bottle of shampoo. That's it. One simple task. But then you see the shelf, and suddenly you're staring at 30 different options. Volumizing, moisturizing, sulfate-free, for curly hair, for thin hair, lavender scent, no scent, 2-in-1, 5-in-1, and your brain just shuts down for a second. You wanted to make a decision, but now you can't even start. This is the paradox of choice, the idea that more options don't always make life better. In fact, sometimes they make it worse. More freedom sounds great in theory, but when every decision turns into a flood of possibilities, freedom becomes paralysis. And it's not just about shampoo. Everywhere you look, life is offering you more and more choices. You want to watch something. Now you've got hundreds of streaming services. You want to eat something. Dozens of apps are ready with thousands of menace. You want to date. Swipe endlessly. Want a new job. Scroll through an ocean of listings. And somehow, even with all that freedom, people feel more stuck than ever. This paradox shows up because your brain has a limit. It likes having control, but it also likes clarity. Too few options feels restrictive, but too many, that feels chaotic. You get overwhelmed, you second guess, you freeze. Or worse, you make a decision and immediately regret it. Because that's the other part of the paradox. Regret. When you have one or two choices, and you pick one, it's easy to live with. But when you have 20 options, and you pick one, your brain starts playing games. What if the other one was better? What if I missed out? What if I just made the wrong call? You don't feel satisfied. You feel anxious. And then that decision stops being rewarding. It starts feeling like a loss. There's actual science behind this too. Psychologist Barry Schwartz broke it down in his book called The Paradox of Choice. He showed that people who have more options often feel less happy with what they choose. They spend more time analyzing, more energy deciding, and they end up less satisfied in the end, because when everything is possible, nothing feels quite right. And this paradox doesn't just mess with your decisions. It messes with your identity. Think about it. In the past, you'd get one or two career paths, and that was your life. Now you can reinvent yourself every 6 months. And that sounds empowering. But it's also terrifying. Because when anything is possible, how do you know who you are supposed to be? You're not choosing between options anymore. You're choosing between versions of yourself. And that pressure is exhausting. The paradox of choice is so powerful because it sneaks up on you. It's sold as progress, as luxury, as success. You're told having options is always good, but no one teaches you how to handle the mental cost of too many decisions. You end up tired before you even start. You waste time on details that don't matter. You worry more about missing out than about enjoying what you picked. And here's the kicker. Even when you pick the right thing, you might not feel it, because your brain is still running simulations about all the other things you could have picked instead. You see this everywhere. In online dating, where people keep swiping even after matching. In career choices, where people jump from job to job, never feeling anchored. In travel, where the obsession with finding the perfect destination ruins the trip before it begins. More options were supposed to make life better, but they often just make it harder to enjoy the things you already have. So how do you deal with this paradox? Some researchers suggest creating artificial limits. Choose from fewer options. Decide faster. Set rules for yourself. Because when you shrink the menu, you take back control. Your brain relaxes. You stop chasing the illusion of a perfect choice and start accepting good enough. It's not about settling. It's about simplifying. And sometimes less really is more. The paradox of choice doesn't mean freedom is bad. It means freedom without structure becomes chaos. It means you need more than options to feel satisfied. You need clarity, purpose, and a way to measure value that isn't just based on what you might be missing. Because at the end of the day, the best choice isn't always the perfect one. It's the one you can actually live with. And the moment you stop asking what else you could have chosen is the moment you start enjoying what you did. Paradox of tolerance. Let's say you believe in tolerance, like really believe in it. Freedom of speech. Respect for different opinions. Live and let live. The whole thing. So when someone shows up with views you completely disagree with, you say, fine, I'll let them speak. That's what tolerance means, right? But then they don't just speak. They spread hate. They encourage violence. They start targeting the same tolerant people who let them speak in the first place. And now you're caught. Because if you stop them, Are you being intolerant? And if you let them continue, are you helping destroy the very tolerance you were trying to protect? That is the paradox of tolerance. It was first laid out by philosopher Karl Popper. He said that if a society is tolerant without limit, its ability to be tolerant will eventually be destroyed, because the intolerant will take advantage of that tolerance. They will use it as a weapon, and once they have enough power, they will get rid of tolerance entirely. So the very thing you were trying to protect ends up getting erased. Not by force, but by your own unwillingness to draw a line. It's a paradox because it feels like a betrayal of the value you hold. You want to be open, but openness without boundaries becomes self-destructive. Let's be real. Most people like the idea of tolerance because it sounds fair. It sounds peaceful. It feels like the high ground. But this paradox shows that unchecked tolerance can be naive, and in the worst cases, dangerous. Think of it like a garden. You want all plants to grow. You want diversity. But if you let weeds take over, they choke everything else. So do you pull the weeds, or do you let them grow in the name of fairness? That is where this gets uncomfortable, because the paradox of tolerance asks you to consider something a little ugly. It asks whether protecting peace might actually require you to be a little bit intolerant, and not just of ideas, but of behaviors, of movements, of actions that seek to tear down the system of openness itself. It's not about silencing disagreement. It's about recognizing when disagreement turns into destruction. Popper even warned that we shouldn't suppress opinions just because they're offensive or wrong. The danger only kicks in when those ideas are paired with violence or hate, when the goal is no longer discussion but domination. And that's where many people freeze. Because how do you tell the difference between strong disagreement and actual danger? The paradox doesn't give you a perfect rule, but it gives you a warning. It says tolerance is not infinite, and pretending that it is will cost you more than you expect. In modern times, you see this paradox everywhere. Social media platforms struggling with hate speech versus free expression. Governments torn between protecting civil liberties and stopping dangerous movements. Even personal conversations where people let harmful ideas slide just to avoid conflict. But if you let the most harmful voices go unchecked in the name of freedom, they eventually drown out all other voices. That's not freedom. That's surrender. The paradox of tolerance is a wake-up call. It tells you that peace has to be defended, that some boundaries are not oppressive, they're protective. And sometimes, saying no is the only way to protect the ability to say yes to everything else. It also challenges the idea that all views deserve equal treatment, because some views are not meant to coexist. Some are built to silence, erase, or destroy. So does that mean you become what you're fighting? Not if you stay conscious of the line. Not if your goal is to preserve freedom, not to control it. The key difference is this. Tolerance makes space. Intolerance takes space. And when the taking becomes aggressive, unchecked, and violent, then tolerating it is no longer noble. It's suicidal. This paradox forces you to stop thinking in absolutes. It asks you to judge context, motive, consequence. And yeah, that's harder, but it's also real life. So no, you don't need to shut down every view that makes you uncomfortable. But you do need to recognize when a view crosses from being challenging to being corrosive. Tolerance is not weakness, but it becomes weakness the moment it refuses to protect itself. So the next time someone says you should tolerate everything no matter what, ask them this. Should I tolerate the people who would gladly take that right away from me? Because if the answer is yes, then they've already lost the point. Paradox of the hip. Let's say I put a single grain of sand on a table, just one. No one would call that a heap. That's just a grain, obvious. Then I add another grain, still not a heap. Add another, and another. At what point does it become a heap? That's the paradox of the heap, also known as the Sorites Paradox. And it sounds silly until you realize how deep it goes. Because the truth is, there is no clear moment when a few grains suddenly become a heap. But at the same time, you know that a million grains definitely is one. So where's the line? This paradox messes with something most of us take for granted, the way we use everyday language. Words like heap, tall, bald, rich, poor, even old. These are vague categories that don't have clear boundaries. But we use them like they do. And that's the trap. If removing one grain from a heap doesn't stop it from being a heap, then technically you could keep removing one at a time and still call it a heap, all the way down to one grain, which makes no sense. But go the other way. If one grain is not a heap, and adding just one grain doesn't magically turn it into one, then technically no amount of adding one grain at a time should ever make a heap. Which also makes no sense, and that's what makes this so sneaky. It shows how vague language breaks under pressure. It doesn't mean the concept of a heap is useless. It means it's fuzzy, and fuzzy concepts can't always survive sharp logic. But this goes way beyond sand. Imagine someone starts losing hair. At what point do they become bald? One hair gone doesn't do it. Two hairs? Still no. But at some point, yeah, they are bald. So where is the tipping point? You'll run into this in moral questions too. If lying once isn't that bad, and lying twice isn't much worse, how many lies make you a bad person? If stealing a single dollar isn't life-changing, when does it become unethical? At $10, 100, a million. It even shows up in law. Think about legal limits, like how much blood alcohol content makes someone legally drunk. The law has to draw a line. But the human body doesn't operate in clear steps. You don't suddenly flip from sober to drunk. It's gradual. But the system still demands a number. That's what makes the Sorites Paradox so uncomfortable. It forces you to admit that a lot of the rules you live by are based on slippery definitions, and when you try to pin them down with perfect logic, they fall apart. Some philosophers have tried to solve this by rejecting the idea that categories have sharp edges. They argue that language just isn't built for precision, and that's okay. Words like heap aren't about exact numbers. They're about general impressions. Others have taken a harder route. They try to redefine vague terms into exact thresholds, like saying, a heap starts at exactly 1,000 grains, or bald means fewer than 100 hairs. But that feels artificial. It doesn't match how we actually think or speak. So you're left with this tension. Either accept the fuzziness or force hard definitions onto things that were never meant to be precise. And here's the mind twist. This paradox isn't broken. It's working exactly as intended. It's not showing you that the world is wrong. It's showing you that language is limited, that the words we use every day are shortcuts. Useful, yes, but not flawless. That makes the Sorites Paradox one of the most relatable logic traps out there. Because it's not about some imaginary scenario. It's about how you define everything in your life, from love to identity to success. When does someone become successful? After they make their first dollar. After they buy their first house. after they get a certain number of followers. There is no exact line, but we all act like there is. And maybe that's the bigger truth behind this paradox. Not everything needs a hard boundary to be real. Some things are vague, messy, gradual, and just because you can't draw the exact line doesn't mean the change isn't happening. A heap is not about numbers. It's about perception. Just like a crowd, just like beauty, just like trust. And when you accept that, you stop needing everything to fit into neat little categories. You start understanding how much of life lives in the gray areas. Because sometimes the problem isn't the heap. It's the way you're trying to define it. Self-reference trap. Here's something that sounds simple at first. A sentence that talks about itself. No big deal, right? But then it hits you. Some of those sentences break your brain, like this one. This sentence is false. Read that again. If the sentence is true, then it must be false. But if it's false, then that means it's true. So which is it? That's what we call a self-reference trap, a logical black hole where something refers to itself in a way that creates a loop with no clean way out. It sounds abstract, but the second your brain starts trying to untangle it, you're stuck. It's like your thoughts are arguing with themselves and refusing to agree on anything. And this is not just a party trick or a clever one-liner. Self-reference traps sit at the heart of some of the deepest problems in logic, language, and even mathematics. Here's another one. I always lie. If that sentence is true, then the speaker is lying, which means the sentence is false. But if the sentence is false, that means the person doesn't always lie, which means sometimes they tell the truth, which means the sentence might be true. But wait, see the loop forming again. These kinds of statements create what's called a paradox of self-reference. The system is eating itself. It's trying to define something from the inside, using itself as the only tool. It's like trying to pick yourself up by your own hair. Now zoom out from sentences to systems. Imagine you try to create a complete set of rules for understanding truth, a system that can explain everything within it, using only itself. You'd think that's possible. But then you run into the same trap. That's where Gödel's incompleteness theorem comes in. Yes, the same Gödel who cracked open math by showing that in any complex system, there will always be true statements that can't be proven from within the system. And how did he prove it? With self-reference. He basically created a mathematical version of the sentence "this statement is unprovable." If it's provable, it's false. If it's unprovable, it's true. Which means it's true, but can't be proven true within the system. Boom. Logical explosion. That's the power of self-reference. It forces you to admit that some systems just can't hold themselves up. They can't look in the mirror without cracking. And here's the twist. You see these traps in real life all the time. You just might not realize they're the same thing. Take trust. Imagine someone says, "Trust me, I never lie." If your entire reason for trusting them is based on that sentence, you've got a loop. If they're lying, then the statement is false. But if it's false, they do lie. So your reason to trust vanishes. Same with authority. Think about someone who says, "I'm in charge because I said I'm in charge." Self-reference. No external proof, just a circular loop of justification. Even in identity. I'm authentic because I say I am. But if that's your only measure, who's really doing the measuring? This is why self-reference traps are so dangerous, because they don't just confuse you. They break systems. They break certainty. And once you notice them, you start seeing them everywhere. in philosophy, in politics, in religion, in logic, in your own thoughts, especially the ones that seem the most confident. Because here's the thing. If a belief can only prove itself by referencing itself, it might not be as stable as you think. Sometimes what feels solid is just a loop that hasn't collapsed yet. The most powerful part of this trap is that it doesn't feel like a trap at first. It feels clean. It feels self-contained. But that's the illusion. You're not moving forward. You're just spinning in a circle fast enough that it feels like progress. So how do you deal with this? You look outside the loop. You ask what else could verify this claim. What external thing backs it up? You challenge the circle by stepping out of it. And sometimes, the only way to break the loop is to stop asking whether the sentence is true or false. You accept that some statements don't have clear answers, and you stop trying to force clarity where there isn't any. The self-reference trap is a reminder that logic has edges, that systems have blind spots, and that your own thoughts can trick you if you're not careful. It doesn't mean truth is impossible. It means truth might not always come from within, because sometimes the thing pointing at itself isn't telling you anything new. It's just spinning. Achilles and the tortoise. Let's say you're in a race. You, being Achilles, are one of the fastest runners in the world. The tortoise, well, isn't exactly fast. In fact, it's slow. But let's say you give the tortoise a head start. You think easy win, right? But here's the twist. As you chase after the tortoise, you notice something weird. Every time you get to where the tortoise was, it's moved a little further ahead. And as fast as you run, every time you reach its last spot, it's moved just enough to keep you from catching up. This is the Achilles and the Tortoise Paradox, first put forward by Zeno of Ilia over 2,000 years ago. At first glance, it seems silly. Of course, Achilles should easily outrun the tortoise. But Zeno's argument flips this assumption on its head. Zeno's paradox suggests that no matter how fast Achilles runs, he can never actually catch the tortoise. Here's why. Every time Achilles reaches the point where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved a little bit further ahead. So even though Achilles is running much faster, he's always playing catch up. It sounds crazy, right? But let's break it down. Zeno argues that, in theory, Achilles must first cover the distance to where the tortoise started. Then, by the time he reaches that point, the tortoise will have moved further ahead, and so Achilles must cover the distance to that new spot. And again, by the time he reaches it, the tortoise has moved. This cycle repeats infinitely. So, according to Zeno, no matter how fast Achilles runs, he'll never actually catch the tortoise, because there are always an infinite number of tiny steps he needs to take. It's like trying to cross a street, but every time you reach the curb, there's always another inch ahead of you to cover. Now, let's be honest. That doesn't make sense. Achilles is way faster than the tortoise. Of course, he's going to catch up. This is where the paradox plays with your mind. The reasoning sounds solid, but the outcome doesn't match reality. Zeno's paradox relies on the idea of an infinite number of steps. It creates an illusion of an infinite series of distances that Achilles needs to cover before catching up. But here's where we cheat a little bit and use modern math to untangle the mess. In reality, those infinite steps add up to a finite distance. The time Achilles takes to cover all those steps is not infinite. It's actually very small. Even though there's an infinite number of them, they become progressively smaller and smaller. the total distance Achilles needs to run is finite, and so is the time it takes to get there. Zeno's paradox shows us something deep about infinity and the way our brains struggle with big concepts. We think of infinity as something that never ends. But in math, there's a difference between a never-ending series and something that adds up to a finite value. The sum of an infinite series can sometimes still be finite, and this is exactly what happens in the Achilles and the Tortoise paradox. This paradox also makes us think about how we view time and motion. We naturally assume that if we are faster than something, we will eventually catch it. Zeno throws that assumption into question, making us realize that our understanding of speed, distance, and time can be more complicated than we think. And you see this principle applied in modern physics and technology. For example, when talking about the speed of light or the way objects move in space, sometimes we deal with infinitesimally small steps that add up in ways that challenge our common sense. So even though the paradox sounds like an ancient riddle, it's still relevant today. What's really interesting is how this paradox makes us question what it means to move from one point to another. It asks us, is motion just a series of discrete steps, or is there something continuous happening between those steps? Can we even understand motion without using abstract concepts like infinity? While the paradox was meant to confuse and challenge the thinkers of Zeno's time, it's actually done something more valuable. It's pushed us to understand infinity in a new way. It's shown us that, with a little thought, infinite processes can result in finite outcomes. So yes, Achilles will catch up to the tortoise. He'll overtake it easily. But Zeno's paradox still leaves us with a reminder that infinity can twist our expectations in the strangest ways. And that sometimes, things that seem impossible on the surface, when examined from a different angle, turn out to be quite possible. Yablo's paradox. Yablo's paradox is a fascinating one because it takes the idea of self-reference and flips it on its head in a way you wouldn't expect. Unlike the liar paradox, where a sentence refers directly to itself, Yablo's paradox is a series of sentences that point to each other in a loop, creating a never-ending cycle of truth and falsehood that can't be resolved. Here's how it works. You start with a sentence that says, "The next sentence is false." Then, the next sentence says, "The previous sentence is true." From there, you could keep going, adding more sentences, each one making a claim about the truth or falsehood of the next one. It sounds straightforward at first, but as you keep reading, you realize something. Each sentence depends on the next one to determine whether it's true or false. But here's the kicker. It's a never-ending loop, so you can't definitively say if any of the sentences are true or false, because they all refer to each other in a cycle that can't be broken. Now, what's really wild is that this doesn't rely on a direct contradiction, like the liar paradox does. There's no "this sentence is false" kind of claim. Instead, it's about a sequence of claims that constantly depend on each other, creating a paradox not by contradiction, but by infinite regression. It's a subtle twist, but it makes all the difference. This paradox challenges our understanding of truth in a unique way. Normally, we expect that statements either hold up as true or false. But with Yablo's paradox, you're left stuck, unable to resolve the truth value of any of the statements because they're all part of this infinite chain. The cool thing is that this paradox highlights how infinity can mess with our logic. It's like looking for a solution that just keeps slipping further away, no matter how much you try to approach it. And while this may seem like just an intellectual exercise, the idea behind it has real-world applications. Think about systems of rules, like in law or ethics. Sometimes we create systems that seem logical on the surface, but the more you dig into them, the more they start to contradict themselves or create circular reasoning. Yablo's paradox reminds us that even well-structured systems can lead to situations where clarity and resolution are impossible just because of the way the system is set up. This paradox doesn't just apply to abstract logic problems. It also plays out in real life. For example, in political arguments or philosophical debates, people can end up in situations where they're just going around in circles, each point depending on the next in a way that never truly resolves. This is exactly what Yablo's paradox is demonstrating, that systems of reasoning can, in some cases, be so intricately tied together that they can't escape their own loop. And the scariest part, Yablo's paradox doesn't offer a way out. It doesn't give you a neat solution like some paradoxes do. Instead, it challenges you to think about the limitations of logic itself and the systems we create to understand the world. It shows us that sometimes the structure of a problem can prevent us from ever finding a resolution, no matter how hard we try. The beauty of Yablo's paradox is in the way it breaks down our basic assumptions about truth and logic. We tend to think of truth as something fixed, but this paradox reveals that even seemingly simple logical systems can be infinitely complex and ultimately unresolvable. It forces us to confront the limits of what we can know and understand. In the end, Yablo's paradox is more than just a thought experiment. It's a reminder that our search for answers, whether in philosophy, logic, or life, can sometimes lead us to dead ends, not because we're not trying hard enough, but because the very structure of our reasoning is flawed. Lottery Paradox. You've just bought a lottery ticket. You know the odds aren't in your favor, but you still have hope. After all, someone has to win, right? Now, imagine there's a town where 1,000 people have each bought a lottery ticket, and the winning ticket is guaranteed to be drawn. You can easily figure out the odds for yourself. Each of you has a 1 in 1,000 chance of winning. But here's where things get tricky. Despite the fact that you know the odds, let's assume that each of the 1,000 ticket holders is certain they won't win. They all reason that there are 999 other people who could win, but not them. This is the lottery paradox in action. It sounds illogical, right? How can everyone in the town be so confident they're not going to win when it's a known fact that one of them will? And yet, every individual in the town seems to be perfectly justified in believing that their ticket is a loser. It's a paradox because there seems to be a contradiction between the certainty of the individual and the guaranteed fact that one person will win. The lottery paradox works like this. On the one hand, it's true that each individual knows the odds. They understand that their ticket has a 1 in 1,000 chance of winning. On the other hand, each person is convinced they're not going to win. This creates a paradox where, logically, everyone should think they have a small chance of winning. But, practically, they all think they have no chance. Now, let's break it down a bit. What's the core issue here? The paradox highlights the tension between general knowledge and personal belief. You might have all the statistical knowledge in the world about the lottery odds, but at the same time, it's completely rational to think your own ticket is not the winner. After all, in a lottery with 1,000 participants, it would be highly unlikely that any single individual would win. But that's the paradox. While you know one person will win, you still logically conclude that you won't be the one. This paradox also shines a light on the concept of belief versus knowledge. Even though everyone knows that one ticket will win, it feels more plausible to assume they won't be the winner. And in a way, this makes sense. People tend to underestimate their own chances of winning big and overestimate their chances of losing. But this overconfidence bias is what makes the paradox so interesting. It also brings up questions about how we interpret probability in real life. If you ask someone if they'll win the lottery, they might say, "I know the odds are stacked against me, but there's always a chance." And while that's true in theory, practically, they understand the reality. They probably won't win. But that doesn't stop them from buying the ticket. This paradox speaks to the way we process probability and make decisions. We understand odds on a logical level, but act in ways that don't always align with that understanding. The paradox challenges our idea of what it means to know something. We might know the statistical odds, but emotionally and psychologically, we often ignore those odds in favor of personal belief or hope. The deeper part of the lottery paradox has to do with how we use probability in everyday life. In some ways, this paradox is about the tension between rational thinking and emotional or psychological patterns. Why, despite knowing the odds, do people still hold on to the belief that they won't win? Why is it so hard to accept that one of them will win while also believing that it won't be me? This speaks to the ways in which we often deny the truth of probability because we prefer to think of ourselves as exceptions to the rule. In a way, the lottery paradox reminds us that our minds don't always work in perfect alignment with reality. We tend to frame situations in ways that feel more comfortable or plausible to us, even if the statistical truth is staring us in the face. And in the case of the lottery, that means even though we know someone will win, it's tough to shake the personal belief that it won't be me. The paradox also says something about the nature of knowledge itself. Even though you might understand something intellectually, that doesn't necessarily mean it will affect your personal beliefs or actions. You might know the odds, but that knowledge doesn't always change the way you feel about your personal chances. This disconnect between knowledge and belief is what makes the lottery paradox so powerful and perplexing. Frame problem. You know that feeling when you make a decision and right after, you wonder if you considered everything. It's almost like, no matter how much you think about it, there's always something new to consider that you didn't think about initially. This is essentially the frame problem in a nutshell. The frame problem arises in artificial intelligence, AI, and cognitive science. At its core, it's about how we, as humans or machines, decide what to think about when making a decision or forming a belief. The problem is figuring out what doesn't change when an event happens. In other words, when something changes in your environment, what things remain unaffected by that change? Let's say you're in a room and the door opens. A person enters the room. The frame problem isn't about the person entering the room itself. It's about what you don't need to think about. The chair is still a chair. The lights are still on, and the walls haven't moved. But how do we know all this? It seems like it would be hard to keep track of all the things that stay the same every time something changes. This issue arises because our minds' and AI systems have to deal with infinite possibilities of what could change. When something happens, you can't possibly think of everything that stays the same. In fact, you likely don't even think about what stays the same because you just assume it. That's the trick. The things that remain unchanged don't demand your attention, but the moment something does change, it becomes tricky to manage. It's almost like trying to keep a mental list of everything that stays constant while also focusing on the things that change. So why does this matter? Imagine you're building an AI system for a robot that's supposed to interact with the world. If this robot doesn't know what stays the same when something changes, it could make big mistakes. Let's say it's programmed to move objects around. If it doesn't understand that the table stays in the same spot when an object is moved, it might start thinking the table has moved too. The AI has to know what things are irrelevant to the change, and this is where the frame problem becomes a major hurdle. This problem is extremely difficult for AI because, unlike humans, it doesn't have the inherent ability to just know what's irrelevant. We, as humans, rely on experience and context to understand what's likely unchanged. But teaching a machine to understand that certain things stay the same while others change, that's another story. It's a huge challenge in creating systems that can think like we do. But here's the kicker. It's not just AI that faces this problem. We do too. Think about it. In our daily lives, we don't always notice what stays the same when things change, but we don't need to consciously track every unchanging detail. Our brains are wired to simplify and ignore irrelevant data. When you're walking through your house and suddenly hear a knock on the door, you don't immediately start processing that the floor is still the floor or the ceiling is still the ceiling. You just focus on the new information: someone's at the door. It's a remarkable feat of human cognition that we don't have to explicitly track every single thing that stays constant in the world around us. But that's where the frame problem shows up. As soon as we try to explicitly teach a machine to navigate the world the way we do, we realize just how complex and layered the world is. So, the frame problem challenges both human cognition and artificial intelligence. It raises a fundamental issue. How do we know what to ignore and what to pay attention to when things change around us? The simple act of knowing what stays the same is something we take for granted, but when it's boiled down into a problem for machines to solve, it's a massive issue. AI systems today, even with all their advances, still struggle with this problem. It's like trying to create a perfect map of the world, one that knows not only what's changing, but also what shouldn't change when something happens. This goes beyond just solving problems. It's about understanding context and relevance, which are difficult even for the smartest machines. And even when we think we've solved it, the frame problem keeps popping up. There's always a new context, a new situation, or a new perspective where we must decide what to keep constant and what to adapt. So, in a way, the frame problem keeps us humble. It shows us how much we rely on experience and how much is left to be understood. In short, the frame problem isn't just about AI and machines. It's about how we process the world, how we know what's irrelevant, how we focus on what matters, and how we take certain things for granted because they just are. It's one of those paradoxes that makes you realize how much we assume we know, and how little we understand about the complexity of thought, both for us and for the machines we're creating. Decision paralysis. Have you ever stood in front of a store shelf, paralyzed by the number of choices available? You might spend what feels like forever picking between options, only to leave with nothing. Or at best, you end up choosing something just to escape the overwhelming feeling of having to decide. That's decision paralysis in action. It happens when the sheer number of choices you have to make becomes so overwhelming that you can't make any decision at all. It's like being given so many paths to take that you can't choose one without feeling like you're missing out on all the others. The more options you have, the more you start doubting whether you're picking the right one. It's the kind of dilemma where, the more you think about it, the less confident you are that you're making the right choice. Imagine you're in a coffee shop. There are 20 different drinks on the menu. You know you want something sweet, but should it be a caramel macchiato, a vanilla latte, or a chocolate frappuccino? And what size should you get? The more choices you have, the harder it becomes to settle on one, right? Here's the thing, having lots of choices sounds great in theory. We love the idea of freedom and options, but paradoxically, the more options we have, the harder it becomes to make a choice. This is especially true when we feel like any decision we make will be irreversible, like choosing a new phone or picking a vacation destination. The thought of making the wrong choice can be paralyzing, and that fear often leads to inaction, or worse, regret after you've made your choice. In a study on decision paralysis, researchers found that people are more likely to buy something when there are only a few options to choose from. In contrast, when presented with dozens of choices, people are more likely to walk away empty-handed. The problem isn't that we're incapable of making decisions. It's that the abundance of choices actually hinders our ability to choose. But it's not just about being faced with too many options. The fear of making the wrong decision plays a huge role. You might choose a latte, but then you'll spend the next few hours second guessing yourself. Was the caramel macchiato the better choice? Maybe I should have gone for a larger size. This self-doubt, fueled by the multitude of options, creates a cycle of indecision. Decision paralysis also happens in situations where the stakes are higher, like when you're making a career decision or choosing where to live. The pressure to make the right choice can be so intense that you freeze. You might analyze every possible outcome, considering every factor, but at some point, the decision becomes harder to make because you're no longer just looking at the options, but you're looking at every potential consequence of each choice. And then you end up doing nothing. But what's behind this fear? It's the concept of opportunity cost. In economics, opportunity cost refers to what you give up when you choose one option over another. The more choices you have, the higher the perceived opportunity cost. You can't help but wonder, what if I miss out on something better? And that worry keeps you from acting. The problem is, we tend to overthink the potential loss associated with any choice. We convince ourselves that we might regret the decision later. Ironically, not making a decision often leads to greater regret, because we're left wondering what could have been. In fact, it's been shown that people are more satisfied with a choice when they have fewer options. When there are only 2 or 3 options, you can make a choice quickly and move on without constantly wondering if there was a better alternative. The key to avoiding decision paralysis is to limit your choices or give yourself a mental framework that makes the decision-making process less overwhelming. One way to reduce decision paralysis is by setting a time limit for making decisions. For example, if you have a limited window to decide which movie to watch, you might be more likely to make a choice rather than spending hours scrolling through options. Limiting the time you spend on decisions can help reduce the fear of missing out and push you toward taking action instead of overthinking. Another strategy is to trust your gut more. When you focus on the feeling that a certain choice gives you rather than analyzing every possible outcome, it becomes easier to move forward. Sure, you might not pick the perfect option, but you'll avoid being stuck in the cycle of over-analysis. So, the next time you're at that coffee shop or making a major life decision, remember that decision paralysis is a real thing, and it's normal to feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of options. But by setting boundaries, limiting the choices, and trusting your instincts, you can take control of the situation and break free from the paralysis. Because sometimes, the best decision you can make is just to make a decision. Confirmation bias trap. Have you ever noticed how, when you're looking for something online, you seem to only find articles, videos, or opinions that align with what you already believe? It's like the internet is reflecting your views back at you, confirming everything you thought was true. It feels reassuring, doesn't it? This is the confirmation bias trap at work, and it's something we all fall into, often without realizing it. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs or opinions. It's like wearing a pair of glasses that filter out everything that doesn't match what you already think is true. And the more you wear these glasses, the harder it becomes to see things from any other perspective. Let's say you believe a certain diet is the healthiest. You start reading articles, watching videos, and listening to podcasts that support your belief. Every new piece of information you come across seems to reinforce what you've already decided, and you start ignoring or dismissing any evidence that challenges it. Maybe someone tells you about a study that contradicts your views, but you're quick to brush it off. That study must be flawed, you think. Or maybe the researchers were biased. It's easy to see how this happens. After all, nobody likes to feel like they're wrong. It's uncomfortable to question our own beliefs, especially when they're tied to our identity or daily habits. But here's the problem: confirmation bias doesn't just limit our understanding. It can actually make us more entrenched in our views. The more we confirm what we believe, the harder it becomes to change our minds, even when presented with compelling evidence to the contrary. This bias isn't just about what we search for on the internet. It happens in every part of life. Think about politics. People tend to watch news outlets that align with their political views. If you're a liberal, you might find yourself drawn to MSNBC, while a conservative might prefer Fox News. The content from these sources reinforces what you already think, which makes it harder to consider opposing viewpoints. Over time, this creates an echo chamber where only certain perspectives are amplified and all others are ignored. The confirmation bias trap can also affect our personal lives. Think about relationships or friendships. If you have a belief about someone, maybe you think a friend is unreliable, you'll pay more attention to the instances where they let you down, while ignoring the times they come through for you. Your mind is filtering the information to confirm your original belief. And the more you look for evidence to support that belief, the more it feels like your view is validated. even if it's not the full picture. It's not just about being stubborn or closed-minded either. Confirmation bias operates in the background of our decision-making process, often without us even noticing. It shapes how we remember events, how we interpret new information, and even how we perceive other people. We look for patterns that fit with what we already believe, and we overlook or forget things that don't. What makes this even trickier is that we're all wired to want to feel like we're right. The brain actually rewards us with a hit of dopamine when we find information that supports our beliefs, making us feel good about being right. This reward system can be so powerful that we'll actively ignore conflicting evidence just to maintain that feeling of certainty. So, how do we break out of the confirmation bias trap? The first step is acknowledging that it exists. Once you're aware of it, you can start making a conscious effort to expose yourself to information and viewpoints that challenge your own beliefs. This isn't about being open-minded just for the sake of it. It's about improving your understanding of the world. By considering different perspectives, you can make more informed decisions and refine your opinions based on a broader range of information. It's also important to question the sources of information you're consuming. Are you only listening to people who agree with you, or are you genuinely seeking diverse viewpoints? Sometimes, just asking yourself whether you're selectively ignoring evidence can help you see through the bias. Another effective way to combat confirmation bias is to play devil's advocate. Actively try to argue against your own beliefs. What's the best case for the opposing view? If you can make a strong argument for the other side, it's a sign that you're considering all sides of the issue and not just reinforcing your own preconceptions. Finally, remember that being wrong is a part of growth. Changing your mind when presented with new, valid information isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It means you're learning and evolving, which is something we should all strive for. The confirmation bias trap is insidious because it's so natural and ingrained in how we think. But once we recognize it, we have the power to break free from it. By actively seeking out diverse perspectives, questioning our assumptions, and being open to change, we can make decisions based on reality, not just what we want to believe. Value paradox: water versus diamonds. Imagine you're stranded on a desert island. You're parched, dying of thirst, and the only thing in sight is a bottle of water. You can feel your body begging for it. But then, out of nowhere, a merchant shows up offering you a diamond. Now, it's tempting, right? Diamonds are valuable. Everyone knows that. But here's the thing. In this moment, water is infinitely more valuable to you than that diamond. Why? This is the value paradox at play, sometimes called the water vs. diamonds paradox, and it messes with how we think about value. We tend to think of value in terms of how much something costs or how rare it is, but real value is about utility. What something does for you at the moment. And in the desert, water is far more useful than a diamond, no matter how precious that diamond is in other contexts. It's a strange paradox, right? Water, something so essential for life, is incredibly cheap in most places. You can get a bottle of water for just a couple of dollars. But a diamond, an object with little practical use in daily life, can sell for thousands of dollars. So why does something as essential as water cost so little, while something so impractical like a diamond can cost so much? The answer lies in a concept known as marginal utility. How much a product or service satisfies you in a given situation. The more of something you have, the less each additional unit of it is worth to you. For example, when you have a ton of water available to you, each extra bottle has less value. But when you're in the desert and can barely find a drop, a single bottle of water becomes priceless. Its value skyrockets because it's fulfilling your immediate life-saving need. On the flip side, diamonds are rare and precious, but they don't solve an urgent problem. No matter how many diamonds you have, they don't change your immediate physical well-being. So, while the diamond might be valuable in the sense of its rarity or its desirability among collectors, it doesn't have the same life-saving utility that water does in an emergency. The value of diamonds is tied to scarcity and demand, not immediate necessity. What this paradox highlights is the gap between intrinsic value and market value. Water has immense intrinsic value. It's essential for survival. But in a place where water is abundant, it's cheap. Meanwhile, diamonds have almost no intrinsic value in the survival sense, but their scarcity and cultural value make them highly expensive. This paradox also helps us understand the difference between use value and exchange value. Use value is the worth something has based on how useful it is to you in a particular situation. That bottle of water in the desert has high use value. The diamond, on the other hand, has low use value in this scenario. Exchange value is based on what others are willing to pay for it. And because diamonds are rare and in demand, their exchange value is high, even if their use value isn't. This is why, in a different context, like an auction or jewelry store, diamonds have a much higher price tag than water. This paradox doesn't just apply to diamonds and water. It shows up in lots of areas of life. Take, for example, a job offer. If you're in desperate need of money, the salary of a job you might normally consider just okay can suddenly look amazing. On the other hand, someone who has financial stability might turn down that same offer because they don't need the money right now. The value of the salary changes drastically depending on the person's circumstances. Similarly, think about time. Time is something that most of us have in abundance, but when we're about to lose it, say, when we're rushing to meet a deadline, time becomes incredibly precious. We might then spend hours trying to save a few minutes on a task. The scarcity of time in a given moment makes it feel more valuable than when we have plenty of it to spare. But this paradox isn't just theoretical. It has real-world implications. Think about water scarcity. When a region suffers a drought, the value of water skyrockets. The exchange value increases as people are willing to pay a higher price just to secure a limited resource. But in a place where water is abundant, the price remains low. The problem is that, despite how essential water is, its value is often overlooked because it's too abundant in certain places. This leads to overuse or underpricing of resources that are essential for life. The water vs. diamonds paradox forces us to question our assumptions about value. It asks us to look beyond the price tag or scarcity and think about utility. How much something actually contributes to our well-being in a specific context. This simple idea has huge implications for how we think about economics, resources, and even our personal lives. It challenges the way we assign worth, urging us to focus not just on rarity, but on what truly matters in a given moment. So, next time you find yourself comparing the worth of something, whether it's a product, a service, or even your time, take a moment to consider the context. Is it truly valuable, or is it just valuable because it's rare or hard to get? Maybe, just maybe, it's not the most expensive thing in the world that will bring you what you need. Sometimes, it's the simplest, most essential things that matter the most. Nocebo Effect. You've probably heard about the placebo effect, right? It's when you feel better, just because you believe you've been given something that can help you, even if it's just a sugar pill. But there's a darker side to this phenomenon that's just as powerful, and it's called the nocebo effect. Now, imagine you take a medication and you're told that it might cause headaches, nausea, or dizziness as side effects. Even if you don't have any of those symptoms, you suddenly start to feel them. Maybe your head starts to hurt, or you feel a bit queasy, almost as if your body is trying to prove the warning true. That's the nocebo effect, and it's the opposite of the placebo. Instead of feeling better because of your belief, you feel worse. Here's the scary part: this effect is real, and it's more powerful than we might think. The nocebo effect happens when negative expectations about a treatment or situation actually cause you to experience harmful symptoms, even when no physical cause is present. It's not your fault, and it's not in your head in the sense that you're imagining it. It's your body responding to the belief that something harmful is happening. Even if there's no actual threat, this can happen in medical situations, of course, but it's also present in everyday life. For example, if you're told that a new job might be stressful, or that a certain relationship will likely cause problems, you might start to feel stressed or anxious before anything even happens. You could be primed to expect the worst, and just the anticipation of that negativity can cause real emotional and physical symptoms. The nocebo effect is a classic case of how our minds can shape our physical reality. It works in much the same way as the placebo effect, where your belief in a positive outcome leads to actual improvement. The key difference is that, in the nocebo effect, the negative belief causes a negative outcome. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but on the dark side. To give you a sense of how powerful this can be, studies have shown that people who are given a sugar pill and told that they might experience side effects, like headaches or nausea, are more likely to experience those side effects than people who aren't told anything at all. In fact, just the act of expecting harm can trigger your body's stress response, leading to real symptoms that are entirely due to belief, not the medication or situation itself. But the nocebo effect doesn't just show up in medical situations. It can happen anywhere. Have you ever been told that something is difficult or dangerous, only to find yourself struggling with it when you try? Maybe someone told you that learning a new skill would be incredibly hard, or that driving in heavy traffic was stressful. Suddenly, you feel like it's harder than it should be, and you start doubting your abilities, even though the challenge might not actually be as tough as you anticipated. It's a lot like setting yourself up for failure before you even begin. You're mentally preparing yourself for a negative experience, and that mental prep can spill over into reality. The brain is incredibly powerful in this way. It doesn't just affect our thoughts, it influences how we physically respond to the world around us. So, how can we avoid falling into this trap? The first step is awareness. Once you recognize that your mind can actually make you feel worse just because you expect to feel bad, you can start to shift your thinking. Instead of focusing on potential negatives, try to reframe your mindset to expect a positive outcome, or, at the very least, remain neutral. Another way to combat the nocebo effect is by reducing exposure to negative information. If you're about to undergo a medical treatment or try something new, don't overwhelm yourself with potential worst-case scenarios. For example, if a doctor mentions possible side effects, try not to dwell on them. The less you focus on what could go wrong, the less likely it is that your body will react as if something's wrong. It can also help to practice mindfulness. When negative thoughts start creeping in, focus on staying present and calm, rather than getting lost in the fear of what might happen. Remember, your body's response is often tied to how much you believe something will affect you. The Nocebo Effect is a reminder that our minds are more connected to our physical state than we might realize. The belief that something will harm us can be just as powerful as the belief that something will help. It's a reminder to be mindful of the thoughts and expectations we carry, especially in situations where we feel vulnerable or uncertain. If we can control our expectations, we can control how much power we give to the Nocebo Effect. And who knows? By shifting your mindset, you might find that your body's response to challenges changes in ways you never expected. So, next time you're about to step into a new experience or treatment, take a moment to breathe, stay positive, and remind yourself that your mind has a powerful impact on your body. Let it work in your favor. Mirror Paradox. Have you ever thought about how adding more of something can actually make things worse? It sounds counterintuitive, right? Usually, when we add more, we expect things to improve. More time, more money, more people. Shouldn't that always make things better? Well, there's a mind-bending paradox that challenges this idea, and it's called the Mirror Paradox. Here's the thing: in some situations, adding more of something doesn't just fail to improve things. It actually makes them worse. It's like adding a little more salt to your soup, thinking it'll taste better, only to end up with a disaster. The Mirror Paradox is exactly like that, but applied to bigger decisions in life. Imagine you're thinking about the quality of life for a group of people. Let's say you have a society where everyone has a certain amount of happiness or well-being, but there's a certain limit to how much happiness the group can enjoy as a whole. Now, here comes the paradox. If you add more people to that society, but the newcomers have very little happiness, the total happiness of the society might actually decrease. It sounds strange, right? Adding more people, more resources, and potentially more happiness should make things better, but it doesn't. Instead, you end up diluting the happiness of the group because of the lower well-being of the new additions. Think about it like this: imagine a party with 10 people. Everyone's having a good time. Now, you invite 10 more people, but they're not as excited or happy. They're just there for the free food and drinks. Sure, the party's now bigger, but overall, the energy and vibe are worse because the new additions don't bring as much positive energy to the table. The same concept applies to societies, economies, or even personal decisions. This paradox also shows up when we look at resources. Take something like a budget. If you add more money to a system but distribute it in a way that each person receives less value as, maybe because it's spread too thin, the overall benefit decreases. It's like trying to share a single cake with more people. Everyone gets a smaller slice, and the enjoyment of the cake diminishes because it's divided among more people, even though the total amount of cake is technically the same. This paradox really gets at a deeper truth about how quality and quantity don't always go hand in hand. More of something doesn't always mean better. It's a warning against the assumption that growth or increase is inherently positive. Sometimes, we need to focus on quality, not just quantity. The mere addition paradox has implications that go beyond just hypothetical situations. It's something that we see in real life, too. Think about the economy. When a country adds more people to its population, sometimes it can strain resources, healthcare, and infrastructure. Even though the population is growing, if the new additions don't contribute positively or are dependent on resources, the overall quality of life can drop for everyone. More people, more strain, and less happiness overall. This paradox also shows up in personal development. For instance, if you try to take on too many tasks at once, you might find that your productivity decreases and your stress levels go up. The idea is that, by adding more responsibilities or commitments, you're actually diluting the effectiveness and quality of what you can do. It's better to focus on a few important things and do them well, rather than trying to add more and spreading yourself thin. It also applies to time management. If you're constantly adding more things to your schedule without considering how it affects your time and energy, you might end up feeling overwhelmed and unproductive. Your efficiency and happiness decrease, even though you've technically added more tasks to your day. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? The mere addition paradox reminds us to be careful about how we think about growth, progress, and improvement. More isn't always better, and sometimes adding more can actually dilute the quality of what we have. Whether it's people, money, responsibilities, or even time, quality over quantity is key. Instead of simply focusing on increasing the number of things or people in our lives, we should ask ourselves, how does this addition impact the overall experience? Will it make things better, or will it just spread things thinner? In a world that often glorifies more money, more success, more stuff, it's important to remember that the best outcomes often come from focusing on what really matters and keeping things at a manageable, quality level. So, the next time you're tempted to add more to your life, take a moment to think, will this really improve things, or will it just dilute the good stuff? Twin Earth thought experiment. All right, let's mess with your mind for a second. You're on Earth. You drink water, right? Clear liquid, keeps you alive, makes up most of your body. Simple. But now imagine there's another planet. Just like Earth in almost every way. Same trees, same oceans, same weather, even people who speak just like us. We'll call it Twin Earth. Now here's where things get weird. On Twin Earth, people drink a liquid that looks exactly like water. It behaves like water. It feels like water. But chemically, it's not H2O. It's something else. Let's call it XYZ. Still tasteless, still clear, still life, sustaining. But it's made up of different stuff at the molecular level. Yet the people on Twin Earth also call it water. So now here's the question that breaks your brain. When you say water, and your Twin Earth version says water, are you both talking about the same thing? On the surface, you might think, yeah, of course, it's all the same. But hang on, your water is H2O, theirs is XYZ. They're totally different substances. So now we've got a huge problem. If you both use the word water, but the substances are different, what actually defines meaning? Is it about what something looks like and how it behaves? Or is it about what it actually is deep down? This is what the Twin Earth thought experiment is all about. It was cooked up by philosopher Hilary Putnam in the 1970s, and it hits hard at the question of what words really mean, especially when you zoom in past appearances and look at the essence of things. Now think about this. If a twin earthling and a real earthling were having a conversation, and both of them said, "I need water right now," they'd totally understand each other. No confusion. Both would go grab a clear glass of liquid and drink it. The function is the same. The experience is the same. But scientifically, they're putting different molecules into their bodies, and they don't even realize it. So does meaning come from how something looks and behaves to us, or does it come from its deeper nature? Putnam used this idea to argue that meaning isn't just in your head. It also depends on the external world. In other words, you might think you know what water is, but your definition of it isn't just about how you feel or perceive it. It's tied to what it actually is out in reality. So even if you and your twin are identical in your minds, your word water refers to different things. It's a wild concept, because it means our language is shaped not just by what we believe, but by the actual stuff out there. You could be completely sincere and still be wrong about what you're referring to, just because your environment is different. Now zoom out a little. This doesn't just mess with the meaning of water. It applies to everything. Think about gold. If something looks like gold, feels like gold, but isn't chemically gold, is it still gold? Think about emotions. If someone on Twin Earth uses the word love, and they feel it just like you do, but their biology is wired a bit differently. Maybe their love is triggered by different chemicals. Are you both talking about the same emotion? It makes you realize how fragile our grip on meaning actually is. We go through life thinking we know what words mean, but it turns out a lot of that depends on context and invisible details we don't even think about. And here's the even deeper twist. The people on Twin Earth have been calling their liquid water for centuries, same as us. So in their history, their culture, their science, water has always meant X, Y, Z. They're not wrong, but we're not wrong either. So the word water doesn't have one fixed meaning. It depends on where you are and what your world is made of. This flips a lot of assumptions upside down. We love to believe that meanings are fixed, that the word cat means one thing, and the word tree means another, and that's that. But this thought experiment reveals that language isn't that rigid. It's way more tangled up in where we are and what we interact with. So next time you take a sip of water, just remember, on some other planet, someone's doing the same thing, calling it the same name, living the same experience. But the truth behind that experience, it could be completely different, and you'd never know. That's the twist. That's the trap. And that's why this isn't just some sci-fi concept. It's a deep challenge to how we think about truth, reality, and meaning itself. Logic of dreams. You ever wake up from a dream and think what the hell just happened? Like your house was floating, your old school teacher was flying a plane, your best friend turned into a dog, and somehow it all made perfect sense in the moment. But the second you wake up, it crumbles. It feels like your brain just threw a bunch of puzzle pieces together that don't even belong in the same box. That's the strange thing about dreams. They follow a logic, but it's not the kind of logic we use when we're awake. It's not structured, it's not strict, and it definitely doesn't care about physics or reason. And yet, inside the dream, everything feels solid, coherent, like it was always meant to be that way. This is what messes people up, because in that state, your brain is still functioning. It's still making decisions, building stories, feeling emotions. But it's working off a different rule book. In the dream world, You might be in your bedroom 1 second, and the next second you're in space. No explanation, no transition, and somehow you accept it without question. That's what we're diving into here, the logic of dreams. The first weird truth is this: dreams don't care about time. You might live through what feels like hours in a dream, but you've only been asleep for 10 minutes. Or sometimes you're in a scene and you know something happened before, but you never actually saw it. Your brain just inserts that backstory out of nowhere, and you believe it like it's fact. It's like dreams don't just mess with time, they rewrite it while you're inside them. Past, present, and future melt into each other, and your mind doesn't fight it. In fact, it welcomes it, which tells you something crazy about how flexible the human brain actually is. Another thing, dream logic doesn't need cause and effect. In real life, if someone breaks a window, there had to be a reason. But in dreams, the window is just broken. Maybe it was broken yesterday. Maybe it broke itself. Maybe it was never whole to begin with. And you'll just nod along like, yeah, that makes sense. Because your dreaming brain fills in gaps like a movie editor cutting straight to the action. This is where it gets even more interesting. Some researchers believe that dream logic is actually your brain practicing creativity and problem solving in a way it can't while awake. During the day, we're trapped in structure, in rules, in what's logical. But in dreams, no limits, no boundaries. Your brain starts mixing ideas that should never meet, and somehow it pulls them together. That's why so many inventors, artists, and writers have gotten ideas from dreams. Their minds connected dots in a way that only dream logic could make possible. But here's the catch. That same freedom is also the trap, because in dreams, contradictions don't feel wrong. You can be both scared and calm at the same time. You can be running and frozen in place. You can know a person is both your brother and your boss. In the waking world, we'd call that nonsense. In dreams, it's normal. This breaks down our usual idea of truth. Because in dreams, truth bends. Your brain can believe two completely opposite things at once, and you won't question it. Not even a little. It's a glitch in the way we usually process logic. But it's also a peek into the deeper layers of how we create meaning. And it makes you wonder, if your brain can accept contradictions in sleep, how many of those do you carry over into your waking life without even realizing it? And think about language in dreams. Sometimes you'll be reading a sign or having a conversation, and the words just stop making sense halfway through. But in the dream, they still feel meaningful. That's dream logic in action again. Your brain values emotion and impression more than actual structure. If it feels true, that's enough. And here's where it gets almost philosophical. If something feels real in a dream, if it makes sense in that space, does it have its own kind of logic? A dream logic, one that's not worse than waking logic, just different. The craziest part is that sometimes dreams use their own consistent rules. Like you'll have a series of dreams where certain people or places always behave a certain way. That's your mind creating its own internal logic system. A whole universe built while you sleep, and it's only visible to you, which means dream logic isn't just random chaos. It's personalized chaos, a reflection of how your subconscious organizes information when the filters are off. So maybe the logic of dreams isn't broken. Maybe it's just free. Free from time, free from consistency, free from needing to explain itself. And maybe, deep down, that freedom is showing us something important. That logic isn't just about math and facts. It's also about meaning, even if that meaning only makes sense to you. And the next time you find yourself flying through a city made of glass, talking to someone who passed away years ago, and solving puzzles that feel deeply important, even if they make no sense. Pause. That's your mind in its rawest, most unfiltered form. No rules, just logic reimagined. Raven Paradox. Let's say someone tells you all ravens are black. Seems simple enough, right? Every time you see a black raven, you feel like, yeah, that makes sense, the theory holds up. The more black ravens you see, the more confident you are that all ravens are black. That's just basic reasoning. But here's where your brain gets twisted. Now imagine you walk outside and see a green apple. Just an ordinary green apple sitting on a table. According to this logic trap called the Raven Paradox, that apple just gave you more evidence that all ravens are black. Yes, you heard that right. A green apple somehow proves that ravens are black. Sounds like nonsense, but it's actually a real problem in philosophy and logic. Let's break it down. The original statement is this: all ravens are black. That's the same as saying if something is a raven, then it is black. Now the logical equivalent of that is this: if something is not black, then it is not a raven. So if you see a non-black thing like a red shoe or a blue car or a green apple, and it's not a raven, that technically supports the statement that all ravens are black, because it's a non-black object and it's not a raven. Just like the logic says. But this is where your brain goes, hold on, that feels wrong. It doesn't feel like a green apple tells us anything about ravens. And yet, from a logical standpoint, it fits the rule perfectly. So the paradox is right there. We have two statements that are logically identical, but one feels like proper evidence, and the other feels like a random detail. Seeing a black raven feels like evidence. Seeing a green apple, not so much, but logically, both are the same. Now let's zoom out. Why does this mess with our heads? Because we expect relevant evidence to feel related. Our brains are wired to make connections that make sense emotionally, visually, or narratively. We like A leading to B in a way that feels obvious. But formal logic doesn't care how we feel. It only cares about structure. And by that structure, a green apple not being a raven fits the equation, just like a black raven does. So then the big question becomes, how do we define what counts as actual useful evidence? Let's say you're testing the theory that all ravens are black. Would you seriously go out and start collecting data on every red car, orange traffic cone, and blue backpack just to say, hey, none of these are ravens? No one would do that. It's absurd. But if you follow strict logic, every non-black non-raven is technically helping confirm your theory. But the key word is technically. That's where this paradox really hits. It exposes a crack between formal logic and practical reasoning. What logic says is valid might not match what we actually use to make decisions in real life. This paradox was first pointed out by a guy named Hempel. He was trying to understand how we confirm general statements, like when we say all swans are white or all metal expands when heated. Do we build truth by stacking up examples that match? And if so, do examples that don't contradict the theory help too? And if they do, how far are we willing to take that? It's a big deal in science too, because science often works by observation. You make a general claim, then test it. But if logic says a green apple supports a claim about birds, you have to ask, is that kind of logic really what we're using in practice? The deeper this goes, the more you see how fragile our sense of confirmation is. We like to think we're rational, But this paradox shows how much we rely on what feels like good reasoning, and how quickly that falls apart when logic stretches the boundaries. It also touches something even bigger, the idea that some truths can't ever be confirmed with complete certainty. No matter how many black ravens you see, you'll never prove that all ravens are black. You'll just keep increasing your confidence. But the theory always sits on a ledge, waiting for that one white raven to knock it down. So every green apple, every blue truck, every non-black thing that isn't a raven technically helps your theory. But would you ever accept that as solid evidence? Probably not. And that's why the Raven Paradox still breaks brains decades after it was introduced. It shows how weird the idea of proof gets once you pull it away from human intuition. Logic makes it airtight, but your gut, it calls bullshit. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that logic and intuition aren't always on the same team. Sometimes they straight up fight each other, and in that space between them, that's where the trap really lies. Gettier Problem. So let's say you see a clock on the wall and it says 5:30. You look at it and think, cool, it's 5:30, and maybe it actually is 5:30. So you walk away thinking you knew the time. But then later someone tells you the clock's been broken for 3 days. The hands just happened to land on the right time at the exact moment you looked at it. You were right, but not for the right reasons. This is the kind of mind trap the Gettier Problem throws you into. See, for a long time, people thought knowledge was simple. You know something if it's true, you believe it, and you have a good reason to believe it. That's it. Truth, belief, justification. The holy trinity of knowledge. But then in the 1960s, this philosopher named Edmund Gettier came along and blew that whole thing up. He showed that even when you check all 3 boxes, you can still end up being right by accident. And when that happens, can you really say you knew something? Let's walk through one of his examples. You've got a guy named Smith. He has good reason to believe his coworker Jones will get a promotion. The boss told him. He also sees Jones carrying 10 coins in his pocket. So Smith comes to believe that the person who will get the promotion has 10 coins in their pocket. But here's the twist. At the last minute, the boss changes their mind and gives the promotion to Smith. And it turns out, without even knowing it, Smith had exactly 10 coins in his pocket the whole time. So his belief that the promoted person has 10 coins in their pocket is true. He believed it. He had a reason. But he was right for the wrong reasons. He believed Jones would get the promotion, not himself. He believed Jones had the coins, not himself. So yeah, he was correct. But it feels weird to say he knew that. And that's the Gettier Problem. It shows that truth, belief, and justification aren't enough. You can have all 3 and still be lucky. Still be guessing in the dark and just happen to hit the target. It exposes this gap in what we think of as knowledge. It forces you to ask, when does a belief actually become knowledge? What else do you need to add to make it solid? Some people say you need no luck. That's one approach. That real knowledge can't have anything to do with coincidence. If you end up being right by chance, it's not knowledge. It's just a lucky guess that looks smart. It's like flipping a coin and calling heads for no reason, and then acting like you predicted the outcome. But the deeper issue is that this messes with how we operate every day, because we go through life constantly making assumptions. We believe things based on evidence, clues, past experience. And most of the time it works. But the Gettier problem reminds you that you might be stacking your beliefs on a cracked foundation without even realizing it. It shakes up science too, because scientists build theories based on observations. But what if some of those observations just happened to align with the theory and weren't actually reliable? What if we're right now, but only by chance? It even hits your personal life. Like when you think someone's mad at you because they didn't text back, and later you find out they really were mad, but not for the reason you thought. You were right, but your logic was way off. So did you know it? Or did you just guess correctly with broken info? That's the uncomfortable space the Gettier problem lives in. It doesn't just ask what is knowledge. It asks what counts as real knowing. And it shows how thin the line is between smart reasoning and just getting lucky. And once you see that, it makes you question your confidence in everything. Your beliefs, your instincts, your memories. You start realizing that being right and knowing you're right aren't always the same thing. And if that's true, how much of what we call knowledge is actually just a string of lucky shots we never noticed? That's why the Gettier problem isn't just a philosophy classroom thought game. It's a daily reality check, a reminder that just because something feels like solid knowledge doesn't mean it's bulletproof. Because sometimes the clock really is broken. And sometimes you just happen to glance at it at exactly the right time.